atomic gigantification was a sweeping Japan nation when along came a dude with an ultra attitude, a Kamen rider who's the greatest kicker of Japan. And of all, man, life's too short now, baby, to not talk big now, baby.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Kaiju Conversation. I'm your host, Elijah, and joining me, as always, my lovely co-host and editor.
Hello, I am Rex.
And we are officially past the benchmark.
We are now on episode 101, and hopefully we will stop mentioning that eventually.
Well, I feel like saying we're past the benchmark is fair, but after this, it's like, whatever. We're done. This is the beginning of the new era, and then we won't mention this again until
the new era.
We're into our eras tours now, okay?
Oh, God. So wait, are we gonna get stabbed by terrorists or
What?
You don't know about that?
What?
You don't know about that?
What are you talking about?
You don't know about the terrorist attack at the Taylor Swift concert the other day? Or
No.
something?
Was there a terrorist attack?
Apparently there was. I don't really follow that kind of news, but I heard something about it from a friend.
Hang on, I'm gonna check this out real quick.
Yeah,
Did that
look
happen?
up like UK stabbing Taylor Swift terrorist attack.
Oh, somebody was planning a suicide attack.
Oh, I'm sure this is exactly what our listeners came for today. Our take on the Taylor Swift situation. I think it's, from what I know, it sounds horrible, but I know nothing about it.
Yeah, we're gonna...
I feel like I'm saying that in the most apathetic way possible, but
Yeah,
genuinely.
no, I was like, wait. It's like, do we really need to establish that, like, it's not a good thing?
Sorry, I'm just tired. I'm sorry.
Speaking of tired, so this episode's a little wonky. We just recorded, like, less than 24 hours ago due to some scheduling. So...
Yeah, and I'm traumatized by it. Thanks.
So if you haven't already, go check out episode 100. Everything is wrong with Zillafoot.
Yeah, everything is.
So Rex, first of all, how are you recouping?
I am traumatized. Thanks. Thank you. You ruined my life.
I mean, I could have told you that.
But you didn't.
So I was more referencing the hangover that possibly ensued this morning.
I didn't get drunk enough to be hungover. I didn't really get drunk.
Oh.
But I did have a horrible stomachache from the alcohol, like, this morning. Well, no, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't like a month ago after some clubbing. That was a fun night, though.
I'm sure it was.
It was.
Outside of that, how have you been?
Pretty good. I climbed a mountain today.
Okay, yeah, I saw you post that. What's the context?
So after I watched today's movie, I was doing a little bit of research on it, and then I decided I was going to go to the gym because I barely have any time to go nowadays.
That's right, because you got a new job.
Yes, but while I was like getting ready to go, I got a message, hey, you want to go hiking? And I'm like, sure, why not? And yeah, so I got picked up and we ended up going over to this lookout area. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was an incredible view, in all honesty.
Nice.
And not gonna lie, I realized that it could potentially serve as a great short film filming location.
I was going to ask you, like, did you get photos? Did you do some B-roll or something?
I didn't really get B-roll, but like I took some photos of the like the lookout area, but like there were like multiple like on the actual way up, because it's like a good like 5-10 minute walk up or something, maybe longer. I don't remember. Like that, it's like there's just these really nice areas that you could definitely film, and I'm like, oh. It's like I could just picture like it's the type of area that those kind of dangerous-ish areas you'd see in like an episode of Kamen Rider 71. Where so it'd be like you'd be watching them, like Kamen Rider would be fighting the Shocker guys, and you'd be scared for the stunt actor's life because they could really fall down that cliff.
It's funny. I've actually thought about. So I found out there's a quarry near where I live.
Oh.
And I was like, and one of the things I've kind of wanted to do is do an emulation of a Henshin Hero show.
See, I've thought about doing one of those at one point, but it was like, I don't know, at the time I didn't really have like the source of income where I'm like, even if I could write a script, which I had some ideas for, but like if I were to write a script, I don't think I could even like fund this. And it's like, I don't know, if I were to do this project, it'd be like I'd want to do a couple other smaller projects first too.
Right. Yeah, I've kind of thought about. I'm kind of in the same boat right now. I don't really have the finances, but I've definitely thought about doing like a 25-minute like.
Yeah, likewise.
Pilot, not maybe not necessarily a pilot, but like
my idea was like just like a short film that was kind of like meant to be like a random episode in the middle of like a show, you know.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times first episodes in toku shows are the same way. So, something like that would be really cool. I would love to do that. I know one of the influences I would say is like Zebraman. Takashi Miike's Zebraman is one that I would definitely...
See, the two biggest inspirations for the idea that I had, unfortunately I lost like most of the files for this, but the idea I had was kind of like it was very Kamen Rider 71 inspired. But it also, like, my main character was heavily inspired by female prisoner Scorpion. Because I think that was, like, not long after I watched those films.
That'd be... But no, something like that would be really fun. Maybe we should work on write the script out, and then I can finance it and shoot it. I've got a quarry. I've got woods. I'm trying to think, yeah. I actually, before I do my next short film, after Edo Kami's whole thing, what I want to do, I need to buy an external monitor and a boom mic system.
Oh, yeah.
Those I think are next on my list, and then maybe like a color grade or the white balancing cards or something.
I think something I'd want to... I think I want to learn more about lighting, because I really don't know. Like, I've used professional lights, but I don't really know anything about lighting outside of like the basic like concepts of like 3-point lighting, like what's a key light, what's a fill light, and what's a backlight, you know? Like, I don't know too much beyond like the bare basics on that. But that's something where I would actually, I think it would be very beneficial for me to learn more about.
Right. And the whole thing, like, lighting is just a whole, like, that is what
lighting
really...
is an art form in and of itself.
Yes.
Like, cinematography is an art form, but lighting is just a whole nother art form in cinematography.
Dude, and lighting is just so beautiful.
Like working, I remember like working with a teacher of mine named Tom, and like when we were students in like the previous film course I did a couple years ago, like comparing just the setups that we would do on our own, and then which were just like kind of like generic 3-point lighting setups, but they weren't like very like good looking 3-point lighting setups, you know. They were just like people who didn't know what they're doing 3-point light setups. But then Tom like got us to kind of directed us for what to actually do, where to place the lights and all that one time for like an interview we did for like an assessment. And it was like genuinely the final result from the camera looked like 100% professional.
Really?
Like, we were all shocked how great it looked. I wish I still had the video. I mean, I have like the video from another interview we did, which also looked pretty good. But like that first one we did, where we interviewed, the person we had as the interview subject is the director of the film I was in recently.
Oh,
because he was a student in that class.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. I don't know if the audience wants to hear too much more about my rambling.
I'm enjoying hearing it.
But yes, how have you been in the day since our last recording?
I mean, busy. No, after we recorded that, I went to bed, woke up, ate, went back home. I showered, and then I watched. Did I watch? Yeah, then I watched Fight Zatoichi Fight, which is the 8th film in the Zatoichi series. So I'm 8 movies in, and I got more. I gotta watch.
Nice.
However, the next one will be episode 9, or will be movie 9, which with that I will have seen the first 3 discs, which is really good. I think there's 27 discs total. Or not 27 discs, 9 discs. So that's a third of the discs will be done. So, yeah, I'm over 320 films from Japan that I've seen, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So
nice.
I'm happy, but I will say this: Fight Zatoichi Fight's probably the worst one I've seen so far out of the Zatoichi films.
I mean, hey, Zatoichi's got a pretty high bar, since from what I understand, all of them are still good.
Yes. It's the first one where I felt like it wasn't. I mean, it was cool because Zatoichi's like, he's taking a baby back to his father. And that's the story, is his journey from the town to the other town. And, like, it's cool to see Zatoichi have feelings and whatnot, but a lot of
men have feelings, yes.
But the biggest problem I had was, like, Zatoichi also, like, you didn't have his iconic moments. He only pulls out his blade, like, 3 times in the entire movie. So, I mean, it's still good.
There's not necessarily anything wrong with that, like deviating a bit from the formula, not just, being straightforward. I mean, I don't know. I've never seen it.
Right. It's not bad. It's just like, okay, while, yes, it's nice to deviate, there was also some key points of a Zatoichi movie that weren't in here.
Uh-huh.
So we'll see. I think my next one, I'm trying to remember, I think the next one is The Adventure of Zatoichi. I think that's the next one on my...
Adventures of Zatoichi, yes.
So that's my next one. And I'm trying to think, I think I'm officially about to enter 1966 in terms of the films.
Damn, Dai really was pumping them out.
Yeah. So number 9 was in 1964. So they had produced in 2 years 9 movies.
What?
Yeah.
God, and I used to think like Daimajian 3 movies in 1 year. Damn, that's crazy, bro.
Yeah, by the time that Daimajin was done in 66, they had produced 14 Zatoichi films.
Yeah, right, naturally.
But I've been enjoying that. And then I was working on more podcast stuff, on the website and whatnot. And then I bought a book recently. I didn't mention this last time. I bought a book. It's called the Kojeki. Do you know what that is?
No.
So the Kojeki is the oldest remaining book or series of texts from Japan. And it is detailing the birth of Japan. So it covers a lot of, the tale of Yamata Takeru, and Orochi and all that's in there. a couple others. So it's only 60 pages long. It's not very long. So I got that book. It was supposed to be in yesterday, but it's going to end up being today, I think, which is fine. I'm hoping by our next recording I will have read it. Like, it's only 60 pages. Surely I can read that in the time span between this recording and next recording.
I don't know. You're great at not watching Tokusatsu, so I think you're even better at just not reading.
Hey, give me props. I've kept to for the last 9 days. I have kept to watching a Zatoichi movie every day.
You're on your podcast set, not a film set. And no, Zillafoot does not count.
What?
You're on your podcast set, not a film set. There are no props.
Oh, that was awful.
Hey, it would have been better if you were listening.
It would be better if you didn't interrupt me.
No.
But hey, at least I'm watching films. Give me that. Like,
I'm not giving you anything, not after last night.
Actually, real quick, side tangent. You know, you and I were talking about this. How, for you and I, like, the fact that I went like 2 weeks without watching a movie seemed like a crime against humanity, right?
Well, it's like, that would be weird. That would feel weird for me, but like I think we mentioned
right, and that's
for the average person, that'd be like
that's what I'm about to get to.
Normal.
Is that like for me, like that 2 week time gap was like a crime against humanity, but like then you ask some people and they're like, "Oh yeah, I haven't watched a movie in 6 months."
Yeah,
like that baffles me. I couldn't go 6 months without watching a movie.
Weird, like. Up until like just the start of this month when I hadn't, or just like before I saw Longlegs, like before that it'd been like a whole like probably like month and a half or so since like the last time I'd been in theaters, like to see like the Planet of the Apes. And it's like, man, I felt weird not having been to the theaters for a while. But it's like the average person only goes like 3 times a year, depending how old they are. Younger people, I think, go a bit more than older people. Older people, it's like once, maybe twice a year, you know? Unless they're like a film buff.
Right. See, it's stuff like that where it's like, I could never view, I can't see that life.
Right. I think we're just too obsessed with movies, man.
Honestly, no, that's the thing is like my whole world, like I speak like I'm in a movie sometimes. I see things like a movie would like showcase it, like show it and whatnot. I watch movies like every day for the most part. I write about movies. I listen to audio about movies. I listen to music from movies. Like I talk about movies. Like my whole life is based around movies and cinema.
I mean, like sometimes I'll hear my friends talk about movies and it's like, I realize that I just see movies in an entirely different way. You know?
Yes. And people, like, I'll hear people, like, walking by, and it's like, I hear them talking about around here, a lot of it's like, bro, did you know that, like, in the new Deadpool movie, they were supposed to have Ghost Rider? Like, that was something I heard, and I was like, well, the talks of Nicolas Cage coming back have been around for a lot longer than Deadpool and Wolverine.
Right.
But it's like to them that's like amazing wild news. And I think they were also like originally like Galactus was going to show up and it's like that's not true.
Yeah.
So it's like it's weird because in a way
the Nicolas Cage one was true. They were considering that.
And I think it just ended up on the cutting room floor because Nick Cage actually a couple years ago when Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had Ghost Rider show up. He was interviewed and they said that's coming up. You know, they're doing Ghost Rider again. Would you come back if Disney asked you? And he said, all they got to do is give me a call. Like, I'll do it. Nick Cage loves Ghost Rider. So.
We love Nick Cage.
I love Nick Cage. I love Nick Cage's Ghost Rider.
I haven't seen it, but I just love that guy. I think he's awesome.
Dude, Ghost Rider 2000.
Unironically, one of the most underappreciated actors Like, thank God the horror community has embraced him. The horror community understands how committed Nicolas Cage. His strongest aspect is that he is just committed to the bit. But I'm not even joking there. He just commits. Like, he commits. I think even Roger Ebert was like talking about that once, about how Nicolas Cage is one of the best, most underappreciated actors because he just commits to his roles. Sorry, I just love Nicolas Cage as an actor. I think he's awesome.
Yeah. I would love... Okay, so this is going to sound a little like kaiju fan-ish.
Are you going to say Nicolas Cage in a Godzilla movie?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to say I would like to see Nick Cage in a giant monster movie.
Oh, okay.
Like,
come on, Grant.
It doesn't have to be Godzilla. Like, honestly, I don't know if he would really do well in a Godzilla movie. But like, if they did a like his horror films, like have Nick Cage show up in a giant monster movie on it, like a more indie level, I think that would be very entertaining.
That would be really cool.
I know there's a movie called Black Friday with Bruce Campbell in it.
Yes, I have seen that.
And it ends up being a kaiju movie at the end.
Yeah, a little bit.
Something like that. Now, I think Bruce Campbell dies in the movie before that. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think he sacrifices himself near the end or something.
I think it's literally right before the kaiju comes out.
It's like, just a little bit before the ending, because the kaiju's in like the
last like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, oh crap, there's a kaiju. And then they kill it real quick, and then they move on.
Yeah. And then there's more kaiju throughout the world.
Right, yes. But like, I would like to see him in something like that, but a little more kaiju based.
Yeah.
I think that would be really fun. I really do.
I'll just happily accept more horror movies with Nick Cage, please. Longlegs was awesome. I didn't like Willy's Wonderland, but Nick Cage, it was very funny that Nick Cage never spoke in that movie. He never speaks in that movie. That's the joke. He's an amazing Dracula. He's actually hilarious. And
I really want to see Renfield.
Renfield is like an okay movie, but like Nick Cage like makes it so much better.
Isn't he playing?
Scene. Yeah, he plays Dracula, and there's like a whole scene where they recreate
Bela Lugosi's.
Yeah, but they put Nick Cage on it.
Yeah. So really he's supposed to kind of be playing the Bela Lugosi Dracula.
No, it's meant to be like a sequel to that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one I'd like to see.
It's a fun movie.
I saw Last Voyage of the Demeter, which I thought was actually really fun.
It was okay.
I'd like to see Renfield. I'm down for fun movies.
I was shocked at the fact I didn't hate Awkwafina in it.
Who?
Awkwafina. She's an actress who is kind of infamous for being rather annoying. I absolutely hated her in the Shang-Chi, the MCU film with Tony Leung.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's like the side character in it. Like the comic relief girl. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
Oh. Not a bad movie, actually, but she's very annoying in it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I haven't seen Shang-Chi yet. That one's one of the few phase 4? Is that phase 4?
No one's here to hear us talk about the MCU anyways. It's fine. You don't need to
maybe they do want to hear us talk about the MCU.
Okay, here's my MCU hot take. Deadpool and Wolverine is the most mediocre crowd pleaser of all time. They're very cool. I know I'm breaking new ground or something in my opinions.
Well, from what I hear, it's a cinematic masterpiece.
Yeah, everyone who says that is wrong.
You know, speaking of wrong, Rex, we do have some listener feedback from a previous episode.
Are you implying that our listeners are wrong?
No. I'm implying that somebody questioned that you were wrong.
Oh no.
And so, it's not against them. In fact, you're usually wrong. I'm usually the one that's right.
No, that's not how this works.
But we do have listener feedback. It was from episode 99.
Mm-hmm.
We should have done it last episode, but it was episode 100. So we were mostly celebrating 100 episodes of Kaiju Conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna backtrack and we're gonna cover our listener feedback from that episode. We have a total of 4 questions or comments that we're gonna cover here.
Shoot away.
The first one was a questioning of our assertion that Gamera versus Gyaos is government propaganda. They suggested that they didn't believe that because the Narita airport issues transpired after 1967, which is accurate. It was actually in the early 70s that most of the issues transpired.
Yeah, I said that. I said that in the episode.
But plans for it started in 1962. That was when it was conceived. It was announced in 1965.
Yeah, 65 or 66. Yeah, one of them.
And then, so in 1965, there was the New Tokyo International Airport Authority Act.
Yeah.
Which was an act conceived by the Japanese government to reclaim land from people to build new buildings on that land.
Right.
So that occurred in 1965, which started the whole turmoil of Japan taking land from people and building on it.
Right. And yeah, even like even before the Summer and Sun Rizuka documentary, like that stuff was all like going on. Like people were starting to be like, hey, what is this? And yeah. Like I don't know the exact extent of everything that was happening as of the filming of Gamera vs. Gyaos, but it's very clear that, it was news at the time. Like it was current events. Right.
So even though the actual issues of the Narita airport didn't occur before or during this film,
it's not that the current events didn't happen. It's that the most significant aspect, the most significant protest,
the actual protests.
Yeah.
Yes. But there were events going on prior to the film and prior to the production of the film that would have been a good basis for it. Plus the context of the film was funded by government money,
right?
And Daiei was basically sucking up to the Japanese government for decades at this point.
Right.
It would make sense that Daiei would produce a film that is pro-government, taking land from people, villainizing the people, and at the end of the film, making it seem like it's a good thing that they sold their land and built a highway.
And, I don't think I said this on the cast, but the thing is, it's like, look, there's no absolute proof that it is government propaganda.
But there's enough
enough there for me to question the motives. I mean, it's very clear that the higher ups at Kadakawa, not Masaichi Nagata, his son, I want to say it was Hidemasa, had felt that the protesters were unjust in their actions. But it's like I question why he felt that way. Maybe it's not actually that it was specifically trying to be government propaganda. Maybe it's just like that was all the news at the time was in favor of the government. That's that's a possibility too.
Right.
But again, it's just very suspicious given like the government funding, and it's also like a lot of these. The thing with propaganda is at a lot of the time, it's like, it's not there's very little ever absolutely confirming it, let alone stuff that like you have to actually go really, really looking to confirm. You have to go through a lot of documents, contact a lot of people, like movies from like the 70s and 80s or 60s even. It's like a lot of that were like sponsored and altered and impacted by like the US military. A lot of this research around them as propaganda pieces has really only started coming out in the past like 5 years.
Right. And another thing to keep in mind, so in context of the Japanese film industry, pre-US occupation, the film industry was dictated by the government to a certain extent. I mean, during the war, they literally shut down. They forced companies to shut down so that they would have more assets for wartime funds. So when you take that into consideration, plus the fact that Daiei wormed their way into the film industry, Masachi Nagata wormed his way into having Daiei as an established company during wartime and was able to keep his company flowing, plus there being, or no, that was Toho that had communist connections. So Daiei was built upon sweet-talking the government, saying that they'll be the government company. So the foundings of Daiei are very based in pro-government, working for the government, promoting the government. Then when you consider that he was running Daiei, he was not making money, and he was working with the government for other aspects of the company. As the president of Daiei itself as a company has established ties to the government and pushing pro-government ideas. Then when you add into that, what you brought up, the producer of Gamera vs. Gauss being more pro-government and not pro-farmers whose land was lost, you add that into the mix. And then you just look at the story of Gamera vs. Gauss. To me, there is more than enough evidence to provide and say that Gauss is government propaganda. And it's not like that wasn't foreign to Japan, because Eiji Tsuburaya and Ishiro Honda produced government propaganda stuff during war. Well, not Honda, but Tsuburaya did during wartime.
I mean, okay, the thing is, like I said, there's no absolute like smoking gun piece of proof that Gamera vs. Gauss was specifically intended to be government propaganda. But I think it is important. I think that's a conversation the Kaiju fandom I don't think has really had. The Kaiju fandom has talked a little bit about Son Rizuka with Gamera vs. Gauss. There are people that are aware of that, but as far as I've seen, not many people, if any, have really connected the dots between the Uni Japan funding or the what's it called, the government funding program. I don't remember. The Arrow set calls it something completely different.
I'm trying to remember. Let me look.
The Arrow set calls it like the Uni Japan Film Association, but I'm pretty sure that's not I'm pretty sure that's inaccurate.
Yeah, no. What I was given when I did my research was the Japan Film Export Promotion Association.
Yeah, that one.
Now, it's also important to note that during the final days of that, as well as I brought up in the episode, they were talking about doing just a Japanese government film studio. Like, that is something else. Like, they decided that, now granted they didn't go through with it, but there were plans to pull all the funds and take Japanese studio lots from the companies and just build the national film studio. Damn.
That's crazy.
Because, I mean, at the time, the Japanese film industry was in ruins, as we've covered. But either way, it's like, no smoking gun proof, but I think it's, hey, if there's people that want to, I would be more than happy for others to take
the time to look deeper. I would love to, if I had time, to go further with it, but I would hope even more so that for other people who are smarter than me and are even better at research than I am, to really like hone in on that and really dig deeper, because it's genuinely interesting, like seeing how it's like, yeah, there's a kind of a connection between this funding and the seemingly more conservative kaiju films was something I in particular found really interesting.
Right.
Again,
and
it's really hard to say for certain whether or not the funding is why, but I definitely think it's worth the raised eyebrow, and I think it's something that absolutely deserves more acknowledgement.
See, I think just due to the fact that there is so much government, like almost every level of Daiei by this point had government stuff involved. It's like you really can't look at Daiei 1967 without saying Japanese government.
Right.
There was so much involved.
Right. And I mean, no matter what, like, I feel like the government connections make it pretty clear that, yeah, the people at Daiei were, even if they weren't specifically being coerced into making propaganda, they would have clearly had the connections and reasons for, hey,
right.
They're associated with people who would want this sort of viewpoint.
Right. I guarantee you there was a statement of like, it's in our best interests if we want funding and further financing to do XYZ.
Right. Yeah.
So, but a lot of people did agree with us, and a lot of people's minds were opened. And I think
happy to hear that.
I'm too, because I think this is, like you said, this is not a discussion that the Godzilla, Gamera, Kaiju Tokusatsu fandom has really had, which is this very real, like, development of the Japanese film industry at the time. The narrative, historically speaking, has been, in the 60s, there was a film boom in Japan, and in 1967, we see the height of it with every major Japanese studio producing at least one kaiju production, which last time we talked, when we covered that in Gamera versus Gauss, very much we went the opposite of that.
Right, but what's more interesting to me is just that propaganda angle, is how this, to me, I feel it is absolutely propaganda that has just completely gone under the radar for decades, outside of the acknowledgement that, like, politically this film's kind of weird from a small handful of people.
Now, I think a part of that
propaganda angle completely under the radar, not acknowledged. So that's like, wow. To me, it was really shocking.
Now, I think a part of that too is because of the lack of cultural understanding. Especially for fans in the West, unless you know where to look and like do that deep dive into the Japan Film Export Promotion Association, into the airport issues at the time, into the new Tokyo International Airport Authority Act, into the state of the Japanese film industry then and where it went following a lot of things changing in 1970. Without knowing that, without doing that research, without having that cultural understanding, that's going to go over people's heads.
Right.
So I think it's very important, and I would love if more people, I know Kyle Bird of Kaiju Transmissions is also well aware of the circumstances that the film kind of is very against what you would see in typical kaiju films. He's well aware of that, but I would love to see more people well aware, and that actually is a perfect transition into. I have a couple more comments. We have two people, couple comments. The first one, Mr. Matt Walsh, responded with, "This is the best Showa Gamera film, propaganda though it is." And then he sent me a message and said, "I'm 4/5 of the way done with your Gamera versus Gauss review. You've exposed it as propaganda." But he did highlight that you called Barugan a breeze, which he went on saying that it's very difficult for him to get through Barugan as well.
I'm sorry for both of your losses in that regard.
Nah, Barugan's actually a struggle. You're just not ready to have that conversation.
No, I'm ready to have the conversation that it's actually just an easy watch.
It's not government propaganda, I'll tell you that much.
That's so true. It's a less evil film.
Somehow.
Yeah.
And then we also have John Snyder, who reached out on on Twitter. Who said, quote, "Was listening to Kaiju Conversations episode on Gamera versus Gauss earlier today. Only got about halfway through before I had to go to work, but so far it's making me feel like this about one of my favorite Gamera movies." And then it was a photo with the caption, "Gamera versus Gauss
has betrayed us.
Has betrayed us." Yeah, so it's funny, but I do love these reactions with the whole propaganda thing. I think it circles back around to, I think, one thing that you and I both want to do, which is help open people's eyes to more context for these films.
Yeah, I mean, look, like, we're just two guys on the internet. We're not like, I don't think we're going to be like breaking crazy new ground and changing the kaiju fandom as a whole. But my hope at least is that with our discussions, it's like the people that do listen, like, at least sometimes you guys get a new sort of takeaway or viewpoint on certain films. That's my hope, at least.
Or you're at least introduced to one. That's something,
True.
You and I have talked. Yeah. You and I have talked in the past about wanting to kind of disassociate with the general opinions that were established in the past, not because like they're bad, but because
it's just
there's more to be said.
It's just because everyone else says, it's because people just say this, repeat the same things about these movies over and over again, and it's like it's just the fandom has largely been having the same conversation about like the Showa Godzilla movies and the Gamera films for the past 20 years or so,
Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think it's nice to have some different things pop up, Yeah,
especially for I'd imagine like the people listening to this, it's not like everyone in the kaiju fandom, it's just the people who are legitimately interested. And so, like, yeah. I don't know, I'll get off my soapbox, but I hope you all I'd like to think you'll hearing a different viewpoint and like that we kind of take these films a little too seriously, maybe.
No. Well, I think actually we'll bring this up. We'll talk about this, and I think we'll transition into the main topic for the episode. But I don't. Well, so actually, before we, I think we're about done here. But before we do, I do want to bring up what you just said here about taking the films too seriously. I think, my personal opinion, and maybe you disagree with me here, speaking as a film guy, we literally just talked about how we love cinema, right? I brought up how I eat, sleep, breathe movies, right?
Yeah.
So to me, taking a movie seriously isn't wrong, or isn't like, and I'm not saying you're saying that it's wrong, but I don't think there's anything such as taking a movie too seriously. Mm-hmm. I think even if it's meant to be a comedy or a parody,
I 100% agree. I think people are too quick to write off movies, honestly. Especially the Godzilla series, for example, is great example of a series that is constantly written off just because, cheesy effects, bad human characters, no, nothing interesting or important to say after the first film.
Right. And so I think it's important that people, especially like Gamera, one of the biggest issues with Gamera is there's not a lot. Granted, they're not supposed to be deep metaphorical films.
Right. They are entertainment, crowd-pleasing types at the end of the day. That's what they're going for.
But there is context that you could learn and understand.
Right.
And I think that's the thing is there's a difference between looking for a meaning, death of the author type stuff, and contextualizing a film. As an example, saying like a film like Space Monster Wing Magui, saying that that's actually a political statement on the invasion of Japan throughout the history of Korea, and the aliens represent America and Japan invading South Korea and whatnot, like that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, your Space Monster Wing Magui was made because they were promoting Younguri and a company wanted to make a cheaper film quicker and get it out before the other film. Right?
Yeah. I don't know. Definitely the offer is an interesting thing because it's like, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to look at movies that way. I think even in situations where like everything's up to interpretation in movies, like I don't think people should have that ability taken away from them. And honestly, I think it's kind of cool that someone, like even if it's for a movie like Space Monster Wang Magui, it is cool that someone's like giving that sort of movie, that kind of chance where the average person would just, would write it off. Like whether or not like it's really accurate doesn't matter too much to me. I mean, Evangelion is a very infamous example of death of the author, where a lot of people find a lot of metaphorical Christian and a lot of like subtextual meaning where there are just Ultraman references a lot of the time.
Right.
Which is interesting.
But I think, and one thing that I kind of appreciate how we do it is we don't typically do death of the author. There is a place for that, and I think it's
interesting to discuss like interpretations of the themes, but I wouldn't want to say that my interpretation is the correct way of looking at it.
Right. But I also think we don't typically go and interpret things per se. I think we contextualize and we give our thoughts, right?
I think it depends on the movie, in all honesty.
Really?
I think it completely depends on the movie.
Interesting.
And like just what we get out of that movie.
Mm-hmm. But I do think it's important to at least, one thing about what we do, I think, especially for a lot of these films, is providing that context, right? And providing an understanding of why the film is the way it is. Perhaps there was a production issue behind the scenes, and that's why the movie ends up utilizing more stock footage than anything else, or like it's a rushed production, or perhaps a big blockbuster film came out and they were wanting to cash in on that. So when developing the film, they went at a certain angle to make it like another one.
Right.
Because I think all of that kind of stuff is very important to understanding why a film may be the way it is.
Oh, 100%.
It's like learning why your best friend is the way they are. Learning about them, like their upbringing, their relationships with others, like all of that stuff helps you understand why somebody acts a certain way.
Right. And regardless of whether or not a movie's good, I think it's really, I think that like discussing a movie and contextualizing it or just analyzing it is more interesting than just being like, this is good, this is bad.
Right.
Like I think the solely going for this is good, this is bad is a little bit reductive.
Especially since a lot of, and this isn't a bad thing, but a lot of conversation does get chopped up to
It's
what
just
is good
very
and what is bad.
generally reactionary. Is this good? Is this bad? Not much else,
Which is fair if you are not looking to do 3-hour long podcast episodes, right? If you're
interested in that aspect of the movies, then it's like fair enough. But for me, I think that's the least interesting aspect of discussion outside of like just the first like impressions, Like when it's first impressions, fair game. What did you think of this?
right.
Like for movies like these, where it's like I grew up with a lot of these, like the Godzilla films and the Gamera films and all that. It's like that conversation has run its course for me. I've heard the opinion so many times, where it's like, if it's someone I personally talking to, cool, I'd want to know their opinions. But like just like reading online from like a random person, like no matter what, it's like cool, but tell me something new, tell me something interesting.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like we're getting on a weird soapbox here, so I feel like we should move on soon. I feel like we're almost getting borderline pretentious.
Well, I am pretentious. It's my middle
I
name.
knew that.
Yeah, and so I think at the end of the day, no matter what, having discussions on films is very important, no matter what the film may be.
And it's fun. I think
fun.
I've come to really find a new appreciation for a lot of films through these discussions, particularly like this, like Godzilla versus Hedorah, Godzilla almost attack, even Gamera vs. Gyas. Finding it was evil is like, that was really interesting and just changed the way I look at the film.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just discussing movies is fun. I kind of like movies. Did you know that? I feel like I've said that like 4 separate times in 4 different ways.
No, but at the end of the day, I think one to kind of cap this off here, and then I'll wrap up our little segment here. Being able to watch these movies and learn about them, whether it be production details or context or metaphors or interpretations, or just for the entertainment of it, is enjoyable. And I personally think in this year, specifically 2024, I've had more fun doing that, especially with the films that you and I have covered.
I also think it is actually just straight up covering movies for this podcast has actively changed the way I watch movies in general now.
Yeah, for better and for worse, though.
I would say for better. I wouldn't say for worse.
My one thing that I think is a negative is now, like, I can't watch a movie without, like, I can't turn my brain off.
Yeah, I can't really do that either, except for some reason I could do it for GXK. I don't know how.
Yeah, you're a weirdo.
I don't know how I could do it. Well, sorry, I almost knocked the PS5. Wait, no, and almost knocked my TV down.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know why, but GXK, it's like, I could just turn my brain off and, haha, lizard go purr. It's the only movie I could do that.
I've been unable to turn my brain off, and that's good for like analyzing films and interpreting films and looking for metaphors, right? But when you do get those movies, Deadpool and Wolverine, that aren't meant to be anything more than a blockbuster,
crowd pleasing, just nothing more, nothing less. Deadpool and Wolverine is the best example of that.
It becomes a problem because I can't enjoy a movie like other people can. And then that's when the pretentious statement comes out. And I mean, I probably do have a level of pretentiousness that comes with
likewise. I definitely know that, like, my opinion on Deadpool and Wolverine and where I feel like that movie like should have gone could probably come across as a bit of a pretentious like one where it's like, why would you want a Deadpool movie to be about that? Well, why shouldn't a Deadpool movie be about something?
Right.
In my opinion. Why shouldn't a movie be about, why should a movie just be about nothing? Why should it aspire to just do nothing but be a crowd pleaser?
Well, and see, to that point, however, like, there's well-documented stuff out there about how the comic book source material was about something. Yeah. I know Stan Lee has talked about how, like, Black Panther and Spider-Man were kind of covering social issues at the time.
Yeah,
and we see that.
Bro, the X-Men.
Oh my God, the X-Men is like the most obvious, loudest, like, version of that possible.
It's like in Deadpool and Wolverine's case, it's like there's a very, to me, look, I'll give it this. It was written during the writer's strike. It was filmed during the writer's strike. But there's a very obvious angle for where you could take Deadpool and Wolverine and make a really illegitimately interesting satirical meta commentary. But anyways, that's not what we're here to discuss today.
Right.
I could go on a tirade about that.
To get back on track to what I was getting at, you know, there is a level of pretentiousness that comes off with that.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm not pretentious. I'm probably one of the loudest people. Like, the fact that I say that GVK is the cats of the Godzilla franchise, I think speaks pretty loud for kind of that pretentiousness. But that is one of the faults of film analysis and really being interested. And it's not necessarily because you want to, you know, complain about movies, but it's because you want to learn more. You want to be able to see these films and read into them. You know, as an example, for -1, it took me 30 viewings pretty much to understand when Shikishima says this is the same as before in the Ginza sequence. He's talking about how when Godzilla used the atomic breath on the Takeo. The whole time I'm like, oh my God, this is talking about the nuclear bombs. This is talking about World War II. This is talking about the bombs.
30 times? Bro, that was my connection the first viewing.
Because for me, having the context of post-war Japan and Godzilla and his atomic breath, my brain automatically went to the nuclear metaphor.
I mean, like, I could totally see that as a as like a subtextual like idea.
Yes,
I'm surprised you didn't realize the literal meaning.
No, I literally missed the literal obvious one. I just completely flew over my head because
that's kind of funny.
I couldn't turn my brain off. Like, I was stuck in looking into the context and reading into what the film is talking about.
Funny.
It's hilarious. Like, this intelligence, in air quotes, leads to stupidity. Like, I was so illiterate on the narrative.
It's like sometimes you get blinded by trying to read too much into something, or blinded by your own sort of like bias in what you want to see almost.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, stuff like that does happen. But, you know, that's kind of the give and take of film analysis. And, you know, I that being said, I think it's really fun and I enjoy doing it despite its setbacks and its downfalls. And I'm happy that people...
Hey, the way I see it, it's just like with movies like Deadpool and Wolverine, it's like, okay, I'm just like, I have standards now for movies, in my opinion.
But that being said, I am very happy that people are able to hear what we talk about and take something from it, whether that be some new information or a new outlook or added context or entertainment. Maybe people don't even listen to us for the actual like information and whatnot. Maybe our banter and our voices are just succulent and
Never phrase it like that again. Jesus Christ. And I'm the one who usually makes the out-of-pocket jokes. Moving on from that and getting off our soapbox here, I feel like we should finally perhaps get on to our main topic of this episode.
Oh, yeah.
Because Elijah here absolutely hates me, he decided after putting me through torture that is Zillafoot.
We're covering Zillafoot, right?
No. Thank God. I would throw you. I would throw this microphone through the goddamn screen.
Oh. So, okay. So then we have a problem.
Well, there's a solution. I watched a movie, a very infamous movie called King Kong Lives.
You know, I was thinking that you would latch on to my bit that I was doing.
Well, hey, we've been here for quite a while, I think. And the listeners already read the title. They know.
Well, I didn't know.
Well, you're just slow. It's okay. I'm helping you along.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that we're doing King Kong Lives, because you want to know something?
What, you watched it?
I watched it.
Well, good, because that was on our schedule. If you didn't, I would throw this microphone through the screen.
Another one?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So, where do we even begin? I guess, so we have covered the 1976 King Kong film.
Right.
And so, picking up, I guess we should start where we left off there.
Yeah, starting from that, from what I recall, and from what was in the research I did for this film, the 76 King Kong kind of underperformed a bit.
Yeah, because the thing about
King Kong,
Kong,
outright like disappointment, but from what I understand, it still made a profit. From what I can tell.
So this is a weird circumstance, because if you look at it, so King Kong 76 was, while in development way before Jaws came out, King Kong 76 was a Jaws cash-in to a certain extent. And it was supposed to be the next big film. At the time of King Kong coming out, Jaws was the highest grossing film of all time.
Right.
King Kong 76 was supposed to beat Jaws and become the highest grossing film of all time. That is what Dino De Laurentiis wanted it to become. So they put in a lot of money. It still made a profit. It made about $80 million. It still made a good amount of money. It still did well. However, at the end of the day, it did not hit the $100 million milestone that they wanted it to. So it did well on a financial standpoint, but on a goal and projection level, it underperformed. Does that make sense?
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And they spent a lot of money on King Kong 76 between the marketing campaigns and the actual film production. The film was in production for, wasn't it like a year? I think it was a year.
Yeah, I want to say I don't remember entirely, but that sounds right-ish.
Because they started filming before they went to court over it to say, like, hey, we're already developing it.
Yeah, I do remember that, actually. Yeah.
So they were, like, they spent a very long time developing King Kong 1976. And actually, from my understanding, so when Dino De Laurentiis got the rights to do King Kong, they had it in the contract that they were able to do a sequel to the film. So when the courts ruled in favor of Dino De Laurentiis instead of Universal, that gave him the ability to produce the 76 film and a direct sequel to it. Now, as we know, since then, technically, if you want to go off of legalities, the copyright that Dino De Laurentiis got was not legitimate. It wasn't with, because they got it through RKO, but it was actually the Cooper estate that actually owned it. So on a technical level, the King Kong films that Dino De Laurentiis produced aren't in a technical
didn't it
standpoint.
also apply to the Toho films as well, you said?
I think so, yeah, because Toho went through RKO. So technically, if you're gonna go through the legal mumbo jumbo, on a technical standpoint, there's only like 3 official King Kong movies.
Right.
That being King Kong, Son of Kong, and King Kong 05. That being said, because the money was already spent, the contracts were signed, it was already agreed, you can't take that away, right? The Toho duology no longer is void of being official because they went through another owner. It's just, on a technical standpoint, those films weren't official, but are official.
They are official, but shouldn't have been.
Correct.
How I would put it.
Now, getting back to the story of King Kong Lives, planning for a King Kong 76 sequel actually started July of 1976. So before the film even came out, the first one, they were already starting some very rough concepts of a sequel.
Right, yeah, but really not a lot of progress would end up being made outside of like some ideas for King Kong in Russia, King Kong in outer space. Apparently at one point there was an idea for a crossover with the Dino De Laurentiis produced Orca film, apparently.
Yes, yeah, that was one of the, which is really funny because that was the actual cash-in.
Isn't that just a regular Orca 2 in that movie?
Yes. So it would have been,
that would have been such
really
a bizarre
weird
crossover. I almost wish it was made just for that alone. Like, what do you do with that premise?
Right, that would have been really interesting. Now, King Kong in Africa. You mentioned Russia, but there was also one called King Kong in Africa.
Right.
Now, that actually had a treatment done for it, and it was actually announced as an official production May of 1976.
Oh, wow. I actually didn't know about that one.
Yeah, but that didn't go anywhere. There was also Bionic Kong.
No way. Mechanic Kong?
And there was actually another one. Now, this one is probably more of a joke because I guess in the production of King Kong 76, Dino De Laurentiis went to like all of the cast members and was like, will you come back for a sequel? And so Jessica Lange during the press tour said no. The villain actor was supposed to return, but due to test screenings, they ended up killing him at the end and not keeping him alive, so you couldn't bring him back. And so I guess the story I heard was De Laurentiis went to Jeff Bridges and said, Jeff, I've got 2 words for you. Kong 2. And Jeff's response was, I've got 2 words for you. Figure it out.
That's 3 words, Jeff.
Not that. He said, figure out what the 2 words are. But then I guess there was another story later on that Jeff Bridges told that he pitched the sequel, probably as a joke because he didn't want to do a sequel. And his pitch was that King Kong, when he fell off of the bridge, off the Twin Towers, when he fell, he would explode into flames and it would be revealed that he was a robot. And that he was a robot from outer space and that there were space aliens.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine that was probably not the most serious of pitches, unless he's a big fan of Nobuhiko Obayashi.
Now, apparently there was a planned release date for a King Kong sequel of 1978. But as we all know, that ended up not working out due to, cast members not wanting to come back. Stories not like they could not figure out how to do this story. Joanna Crawford actually pitched a sequel called Daughter of King Kong, which would have been like a Queen Kong movie, but actually serious. And De Laurentiis
I heard there was also I heard there was also an idea for like a Son of Kong remake at one point thrown around.
That actually is the developmental basis for King Kong Lives.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that pitch of a Son of Kong remake, Kong wasn't going to show up, but it was going to be a sequel where a female Kong showed up, or just a baby Kong was discovered.
Right. I guess it makes sense given the final product of the film.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was the developmental basis for the film, which I think when you finally figure out that was where the story of King Kong Lives truly begins, it's like, why did you just stop right then and there? You're remaking the quick cash-in that's barely a feature film that is one of the worst sequels of all time. I feel like that's a big enough red flag that, like, you wouldn't do it.
I mean, hey, sometimes red flags are green in Hollywood.
Apparently. There was, during the developmental phase, apparently at one point dinosaurs were supposed to come back.
Oh, that would have been cool.
And Linda Hamilton's character in the final film was not in the original draft for it. Peter Weller was supposed to be in the movie.
I read about that, but then he decided to turn it down for a little movie called RoboCop.
It's like, man, you dodged the biggest bullet and got the biggest win at the same time.
Literally, bro could not have made a better choice there. My God.
That literally changed his entire
became
career.
One of the most iconic roles of all time. Bro, imagine RoboCop not being Peter Weller because he started the movie.
I couldn't. So eventually, the development of this film ended up being in the hands of Ronald Schutz and Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah, who wrote, should be mentioned, Ronald is one of the story writers of goddamn Alien.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up before I did.
I could not believe that.
Yeah. Yeah, so those two started the development, and then De Laurentiis brought Gullerman back, and between those three, that's how they came up with the concept of the female Kong and King Kong coming back with the heart surgery and whatnot.
Right.
And then from there, it was announced October of 1985 for a December of 86 release. To be exact, it was...
Right. But something interesting I found out in my research is, so apparently the film was was going to be financed by Paramount Pictures, who had previously financed the previous one, the 76
yes,
film.
Yes, they really?
Yeah, from what I understand, they pulled out of this film, and actually that's a big part as to, or seemingly is likely part of as to why King Kong Lives. Like, not only did it have a lower budget, but it was filmed in Dino De Laurentiis' own North Carolina film studio. But also the film, mainly because it was trying to save money, a lot of the crew for this film weren't really the guys in Hollywood.
Right.
These were just locals from like where the production was around that they could pay about $5 because they weren't in union, pretty much.
Right. Now before you dive into that, I want to circle back around here because there is an important thing to note about the King Kong Lives.
Oh.
What you brought up about Paramount pulling out. So Paramount helped co-finance. They distributed the film. You know, that was the thing they did for the 1976 film. Now, I actually didn't know about the whole production and whatnot of Paramount pulling out. But what's important to note is following that would lead to Dino De Laurentiis personally financing and distributing that film.
This one, yeah.
Yes, and it makes that, and that leads to this film being the only King Kong film basically made by a small, more independent studio.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because the rest were RKO, which RKO was one of the big five back in the 30s, then Toho, leading to Universal, right? And then Paramount, and then, King Kong 05 obviously was Universal. And that makes King Kong Lives kind of stand out because of the lack of, like, a major company backing the film.
Right.
Now, as far as I'm aware, too, there was a lot of Italian crew members on this film as well.
Yeah. I did hear a little bit about that. Not a lot.
But please continue with what you have.
Well, one thing I thought was interesting in my research is that, the principal photography of the film, from what I understand, there's dates for when principal photography occurred, but none of them quite makes sense because there's contradicting information for them.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, I think I saw dates of February 8th till April 27th for like principal photography. But then on the American Film Institute catalog, it cited some sources that were claiming that the film had its principal photography begin on March 31st, 1986, and completed on the 30th of June, 1986, before being followed up by 8 weeks of miniature work. Which, as far as I can tell, the 8 weeks of miniature work, that is absolutely correct, because that is stated on the press kit of the film. And it definitely would have started filming around like late March, because according to the press kit, screen tests for the film started on March 15th. But the film principal photography lasted about 18 weeks. So if it started in March, it should have ended in July, not June, in like mid-July, I believe.
Right.
So
see, I heard that
entirely makes sense.
See, I heard that filming started in April of 1986. That was from the Orlando newspaper column. They reported that filming began
maybe they
April,
were like April
in Tennessee.
1st, so like March 31st, April 1st. It's like
possibly
1 day off, you know?
And so that would mean that this film was in development, production, post-production, promotion, release within 8 months.
Uh-huh. I saw that the fourth draft of the script was like dated to like November, mid-November, I want to say.
Yeah, so do you know if there was... So does that mean there were 5 versions of the script?
I don't know how many versions there were specifically. I just saw an image of the fourth draft dated to November 85.
Gotcha. I know of drafts 1 through 3, so that I imagine 4 or 5 would have been the last one.
But yeah. Yeah, no, apparently though, it did, from what I understand, this film, because the film was attracting a lot of like non-union workers and people who want like the really in professionals of Hollywood. It actually, from what I understand, got a lot of people. It was kind of this big break for a lot of like the local film crew looking for jobs in that area. It was kind of like their big break in film for a lot of them. And there was actually Screen Gem Studios ended up building a whole new stage for the film.
Mm-hmm.
And the film also used, I want to say, the biggest blue screen in America at the time as well.
That's the second time that the largest blue screen was used in a certain country in terms of kaiju films, Daimajin being the first one. See, I heard, so speaking of jumping off points for filmmakers, Steven Pressfield, one of the co-screenwriters, this was his big break.
Oh.
Like, this was his big screenwriting break, and then it failed, and it took him like a while to even remotely get back up.
Did you see his quote? That is apparently from like his book.
I know he wrote a section, or like he mentioned
like the premiere. So the quote is, "We invited everyone we knew to the premiere, even rented out the joint next door for a post-triumph blowout." He wrote, "Get there early. We warned our friends. The place will be mobbed." Nobody showed. There was only one guy in line besides our guests, and he was muttering something about spare change. In the theater, our friends endured the movie in mute stupefaction. When the lights came up, they fled like cockroaches into the night.
See, unlike Ronald, who had literally produced one of the largest and most popular science fiction films of all time, Steven had like nothing to like save his career.
Right, poor bro.
But also, to that point, I think Ronald was also mildly overshadowed by Dan O'Bannon, too.
Right. It's also worth noting that the film would experience several like production issues. First off, I know there was a lot of like very poor communication between various parts of like the art and the miniature department. There was a lot of issues in that, and just a general lack of communication. Mm-hmm. During filming, there'd be issues with like blood bag having like a valve issue, and I think it like exploded or something when it wasn't supposed to on like all the crew. There was an issue for like one of the scenes at the beginning when they're filming like with the Lady Kong, where on like the island, and just a bunch of swans decided to show up and wouldn't leave, so it ended up delaying filming. But then also on a more tragic note, the director John Gilliman, a very close family member, I want to say it was his son, passed away like a year or two prior, and he was still grieving during production of this, and he would end up not being there for good chunks of the filming of this film. According to some sources, Charles McCracken, who was a documentary filmmaker and goes uncredited in the film, completed filming when Gilliman was unavailable, although reportedly not one. There was apparently a book, a writer of a Kong book. I couldn't exactly confirm which, so take that with a grain of salt. But I was reading how someone who did research into this film had talked to a lot of cast and crew members, and no one mentioned or remembered Charles McCracken, and pointed out that like there was a certain day where the production designer Peter Merton, for example, would direct like pickup shots and inserts when Gilliman wasn't there. So I kind of suspect that whether or not McCracken was like actually like the main director when Gilliman wasn't on set. It sounds like that just when Gilliman wasn't on set, it was whoever was kind of like next in line or willing to take charge was directing.
See, I had heard part of the reason why Gilliman was on and off set for most of the production was because he wasn't happy with his last production. Like, he was very upset over that production. It did not turn out the way he wanted it to. 2, he wasn't happy because the next film he wanted to do fell through, so he kind of got looped into doing a King Kong sequel.
The Sean Connery Taipan adaptation?
Yes, right. Yes. And then I also was told that
from what I was looking, the Taipan movie did come out just like I want to say a month before King Kong Lives or a month after. But from what I understand, Gilliman's attachment to that project was long before King. No, it was like long before King Kong Lives. From my limited research, it sounded like Gilliman was attached, or at least mentioned, as a director of a miniseries version when Roger Moore was attached to the project. But then after some time, and this was in late 70s, mind you. And then after some time, Sean Connery was being considered. And yeah. And then in 1983, then Dino De Laurentiis bought the rights to it. So it sounds like, honestly, De Laurentiis wasn't involved in that until after Gilliman was out of it, which I thought was interesting.
But Sheena, the production he had done prior, like, he wasn't very good on that one. And also, as we've established in the last one, he was kind of an a-hole. Like,
yeah. Oh, I heard he was. I hear there was a bit of argument on set with this film as well.
Yes, and apparently one of the times was with with members of the art department, which led to him being gone for like multiple days.
Yeah.
And I would what I read was he would go sailing, so he would just disappear, and go off the radar, and So, needless to say, one way or another, this film, while credited to Gilliman, was probably not mostly done by him.
I mean, it's hard to say how much exactly was done by him.
Right. That's why I said probably not done by him, because we don't really know.
But, now thinking about that, maybe that explains why this movie kind of feels very inconsistent throughout, thinking about that now.
Yeah. And do we actually before I bring that up, let's continue talking here about production and whatnot.
What else is there? I know the National Guard got involved in production because they got them to play a lot of the military extras.
See, one thing I kind of took note of was, if you look at a lot of like Gilliman, if you look at, I mean, even De Laurentiis wasn't sold on the concept until very into the right before pre-production and whatnot. You see a lot of people just are not sold on doing this movie. Linda Hamilton actually said the only reason she did it was because Jessica Lange got really popular afterwards. Right. And I guess when she finally watched it, she was like, "Oh God, what did I do?"
Yeah.
She was very disappointed with the final outcome.
Yeah.
So it just seems like a lot of people on this film either A, were just doing it for the sake of it's a job and I'm getting paid, or B, didn't realize just how much of a train wreck it actually was.
Right, yeah.
And I think, you brought up the inconsistency and the new fresh blood, which all of that led to the film only having a budget of $18 million, which is pretty good. And once you adjust that for inflation, it's $51 million, 51.5 to be exact. But it's also very obvious.
Yeah.
I wrote this in my notes, and I'll just say it now. The film feels more like a King Kong knockoff than an actual King Kong film based on its production value alone.
Yeah, it just feels a lot less grand than the previous film. And I definitely felt less, how do I put, there's less atmosphere, less build up, less epicness to this film, even though this is like in a sense it's kind of a bigger story because you've got like more monsters and stuff like that. You've got like generally more.
Do you though?
You've got more Kongs, okay? You've got more big monsters than the previous film. But yeah, no,
I will.
It just
I
felt like kind of like a more like a film that just kept whimpering on compared to the previous film.
Right. And another thing I wanted to bring up, you brought up how there's some discrepancies between the art department and actual, the effects department, the visual effects department and whatnot. I think a lot of this too, and you really see it in the special effects department, whether it be the sound design or the actual miniatures or the...
Oh God, sound design is so much worse than this. Ugh.
It's very obvious to me that King Kong 76, the only reason that succeeded was because of how much effort Rick Baker went in and did. I mean, we talked about that at lengths, how Rick Baker challenged almost everything De Laurentiis said about the effects departments. And there were so many competitions between him and the whole effects staff that De Laurentiis had, and he won every single time.
And Rambaldi didn't like each other.
Yeah.
Which is worth mentioning, Rambaldi did do the effects for this film. He did come back.
And it's very obvious that Baker knew what he was doing, and it shines through with the snake effects, with the King Kong effects, with the suit acting, the sound design, because Rick Baker did they had
Peter Cullen
do that. This one wasn't it wasn't Peter Cullen who did this one.
It just sounded like generic roars in this film.
Yeah.
The sound design is legitimately awful compared to the previous.
It's really sad that they didn't bring Rick Baker back, but at this point it makes sense because by this point, American Werewolf in London had already came out, and Rick Baker did that one, right?
Yes, I want to.
So I'm sure his budget, even though it was a King Kong film, I'm sure he didn't really want to work with De Laurentiis again, and B,
I mean, Rick Baker was pretty busy from that point forth afterwards, if not mistaken. He's done a lot. He's done a lot.
Right. He probably, I'm trying to think what he would have been doing.
Doesn't look like he had too much in 86, looking it up quickly. Doesn't look like he had terribly much big in that year, but regardless, he's still done a lot. So
right.
I don't know.
It's actually funny.
Maybe you're right on maybe he was out of their price. Actually, yeah, that is a good possible point, because they were trying to get a lot of non-union people. So
right. It's actually funny to think about it because the following year, Rick Baker did Harry and the Hendersons, which actually I believe the suit actor for King Kong here ended up doing Harry in that film.
That's the one with
yep.
The
Bigfoot, yeah. So it's funny how Rick Baker ended up doing another large primate movie the following year with the primate suit actor of King Kong Lives.
Right.
And it's more well regarded.
How ironic.
Now, where do we want to go from here? We haven't mentioned the box office yet. Do we want to dive into the plot? I have a lot to say about the legacy of this film, but I don't know if we want to talk about that now or leave that to the very end.
Yeah, let's leave that till a bit later once we're through the actual film. So
where should we go from here?
I'm thinking we start the plot.
Okay, yeah, we could do that. It starts off kind of intelligent, but also not really.
It starts off with a recap.
Right, and it's literally just kind of a quicker paced conclusion of 76's Kong with the Twin Towers.
Right.
But why include there's a couple scenes where they literally cut to Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange and their reactions. Why would you just cut that? That was a little bit like, why include them if they literally are irrelevant to the rest of this film?
Yeah.
Like they don't show up, they're not referenced, they're not
Actually,
mentioned.
Jeff Bridges, at least with Dawn it kind of makes sense given she's in Kong's hand, but yeah, Jeff Bridges, no need for him there.
Yeah. It felt like the opening was a little, I get the recap, especially considering it took 10 years for this film to come out. But it's like, why include them? You could cut that, reduce that a little bit, get to the actual new footage pretty quick.
But yes, we cut to 10 years later at the Atlanta Institute to find out that Kong is not dead. He's in a coma.
Which is, okay, but he's clearly dead. Well, they do a bit of a retcon, right? They keep the heartbeat of Kong going.
Yeah, and they hooked him up to like a respirator or something. Right.
And so it's a little weird because, admittedly, if King Kong truly died, how's the carcass still not,
I mean, it's sequel logic, sequel retcon logic. I'm like, whatever. I'll allow you this contrivance.
I was just kind of already like, oh, this is the Godzilla Kong, the new empire of the Kong franchise.
No, that is Godzilla Kong, the new empire. That is the Godzilla Kong, the new empire of the Kong franchise.
It's different. It's slightly less official Kong.
I think we've established that doesn't matter anymore.
I'm gonna still continue. I'm gonna continue my narrative that the Kong films of the MonsterVerse aren't King Kong movies.
Well, you're lame. And you specified Kong, not King Kong, so shut up.
That's true. I'll give you that one.
Regardless, we're introduced to Linda Hamilton as Dr. Franklin, who is the surgeon of King Kong.
Which is important to note. So this is post The Terminator.
Yes.
So this is I don't know if I would say the beginning of her early beginnings of her popularity. I don't think she really became popular until
T2.
Terminator 2.
Right.
But this was definitely in that early stage of oh, she's popular. The good news is it wasn't to the point yet where she would have been, blacklisted and kicked out of, major productions for doing a film like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was low profile enough, which is weird. Again, it goes back to that whole thought of this is a King Kong movie. It's one of those things where I think if you look at King Kong as a franchise, they only come around every generation, right? You have King Kong 33 as in the Great Depression. And then the following that you would have in the 40s, you would get Mighty Joe Young, which is the Kong predecessor, right? And then in the 50s, there wasn't a King Kong movie, but in the early 60s, you had King Kong versus Godzilla, right?
Right.
And then the direct follow-up, not in chronological order, but in technicality, King Kong Escapes. And then you would get in the 70s, King Kong 76. So it seems it felt like every decade there was that new King Kong movie, but it took a little while to get the big event film, right? Because King Kong is such an icon that you don't just put him in a B movie. That's not King Kong. King Kong is the eighth wonder of the world, right? So for a King Kong movie, King Kong 76 definitely feels like an event film, right? The scale, everything, it feels that way. But then you get to this and it's okay, Linda Hamilton, this is in her early phase of growing popularity. She's not even popular yet. The rest of this cast is Nobody's.
Bro, we've got
They-
not Peter Weller here. Like, one of the guys just straight up, I thought he was Peter Weller, so I thought it was really funny that Peter Weller was actually asked to be in this film.
Right. And another thing, Peter Weller wasn't popular yet. This is 2 years after The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Dimension, one of my personal favorite films. That was like an early movie for him, and that is a indie film that is just wild. So, by all means, I mean, Peter Weller didn't hit stardom until RoboCop, and even then, RoboCop was an indie film that just kind of got popular. So, it's really weird. I mean, the biggest name attached to this is Dino De Laurentiis and John Gillerman.
Right.
And they're the carryover from the last one. And even then, Gillerman, I think a lot of people forget that Gillerman directed both of them.
Right. Well, it's like this film feels, stylistically, it feels almost nothing like the original film. All of the grandiosity in the 76 film is not here. Specifically, like, there's a lot of atmospheres in, especially the Skull Island scenes of 76 that is just lost in this film. And I mean, we don't really go to Skull Island in this film, so I get that. But even like the introduction of Lady Kong on I think it's Borno Island, was it?
I don't remember.
That's a great sign. The introduction to Lady Kong, like in the 76 film, the film really takes its time to build up to King Kong, but as we see in this scene that's like 7 minutes in the film, into the film, there's really no build up to the first appearance of Lady Kong. We just get briefly introduced to this other character who's like exploring the jungle with some mules, and then he just runs into the hand of Lady Kong. Right.
And another thing, so while we're talking about that scene, right, and as we're talking about this scene, like the dialogue in this scene is awful.
Oh, the dialogue throughout is pretty awful. Sometimes it's kind of funny though.
Sometimes it's funny, but like this was where I really saw like, oh God, like this film is, the writing in it is just so bad.
I also noticed there's some very bad ADR in this.
Yeah, there is.
Like it's actively like distracting at points.
And, you know, another thing too about this whole sequence on the island, it's meant to be another location, right? And they went to an island in King Kong 76, but they actually went on location and shot, right? Like it feels very big in scope. There's a ton of stuff that's on a soundstage, but there's also a ton of stuff that is on location in various locations. For this film, the island scenes are they keep it very small in scale.
Right.
The scope of this island is not a lot.
Island scene in this film at the beginning with Lady Kong.
You could argue that
the thing is, it doesn't really look very distinct from the Honeymoon Ridge or whatever that place was called that appears that Kongs go to later in the film.
Right, and that's another thing is there's
and that's like that kind of leads to another issue of mine where, you know, the environments that the Kongs end up spending a lot of the film in just kind of aren't very appealing to look at. Like the miniatures look fine, but the actual environment itself isn't terribly exciting. It's kind of boring compared to something like the Skull Island, or even like, say, Solgel Island of Son of Godzilla, like in the scenes where we just see Godzilla and Manila interacting. That is a consistently interesting environment to look at with its, you know, its like tropical trees, the rainforest, and how the film decides to use the foliage not just in the background. Because I noticed in this film there's not a lot of use of the foreground in the miniatures, which I think kind of hurts it.
I agree. Yeah, and I know towards the end of the film, there's like a wide shot of King Kong and Lady Kong running away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a bland set.
Yeah.
I think part of it is there's not a lot of foreground. There's no background. There's no level, like there's no visual medium of like there's a terrain here. There's no hills, there's no mountains, trees are all pretty level. There's not a lot there to create.
Right. I mean, I think the thing is with some of the miniatures is I think that was kind of, from what I recall from the miniature interview on the Blu-ray, that was somewhat intentional because I don't think they wanted to get up close in the miniatures. I don't recall exactly why specifically, but I think it was either some sort of issue with the depth of field or they were concerned the trees would look too fake. It was one or the other. I don't entirely remember which.
Either way, the films, I think if you're going to do miniatures, you have to have stuff in the foreground or else the scale doesn't work. That's one of those things about miniatures. When I shot my short film, I did have a tree that was meant to be up front and personal. I had the trees that were, the camera could be a little bit far away and the trees are there, right? It's not a close-up with the trees. You're just looking at miniature trees as the monster walks. But then I had a big tree for a close-up, like you're next to this tree looking up to my monster.
Right. I mean, that just adds depth to the shots, which while I feel like a lot of the main unit stuff for this film generally does a decent job at utilizing depth in the frame. The actual miniature photography ends up just feeling really flat because it's mostly just the midground is used. Sometimes the background, very, very rarely is the foreground used.
Mm-hmm.
Which just creates a very flat look to the film.
Right.
And another issue I have, I think one of the biggest things that hurts the grandiosity of this film compared to its immediate predecessor is the new composer.
Yes, because the new composer, while it's not a bad score,
it's fine. It's just not one of the stronger aspects of the 76 film was that score.
Yes, that score was really beautiful. And for this one, it's really obvious. John Scott did the score for this, and his filmography is mostly just indie, smaller budgeted films.
Right.
And especially, again, with the name King Kong, your score is one of the most important parts. King Kong 33 built the concept of a film score. In a King Kong movie, you have to have a good film score. Ifukube, great follow-up, and you get a great score between both 62 and 67. King Kong 76, again, iconic. King Kong Lives, the score is just there. It's just noise.
Right. It just vaguely does what it needs to fit the mood of scenes, and that's about it.
Right.
It does not stand out in any capacity. I don't really remember anything about it other than there's a couple cheery beats for the positives, some more positive moments.
Yes, yeah.
And that's all I can recall.
I remember, there's a happy moment at the end when Kong is meeting his son for the first time.
Right, yeah, and there's a couple other similar moments.
There's a nice moment whenever Kong and meets Lady Kong and whatnot. There's
those moments throughout are the most memorable parts, but even then I feel like those are fairly generic. They are just the differences.
They're there to tell you
kind of stand out because it's not complete white noise.
Right. They're really, honestly, to me, this music in this film is just there to tell you what to feel at that current moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the issue with that is if you're making a film, the screenplay, the script, has to tell you what that needs to be, what the leading cause for your emotion, right? That's how you can give a good film that's emotional, like a King Kong film. Inherently, they're emotional. As long as your script is good, you can feel that. Your score is supposed to complement the script and the screenplay. And then the direction on top of that is to make this picture come together, right?
Right.
In this film, and I think it comes down to the disconjointedness of the production team, it feels like a lot of things are just thrown together, and they had enough people working on it to keep it together that it doesn't look too disconjointed. But it really does feel like a film that is being made by people who don't know how to do films. It feels like an Italian ripoff of King Kong. It really does.
It just feels like, to me, it's just a very uneven film because I feel like I don't think there's any point where the film is really great, but I think the first 40 or so first 40 to 50 minutes up until like Lady Kong gets recaptured in the like the nature area, like the nature reserve or whatever. Up until that point, I think the film is generally fine for the most part.
In terms of
just being like a fairly entertaining affair, but then from after that point, it just becomes really dull and boring, frankly, after that point. Yeah. And just completely loses steam.
I will say this, I don't remember really feeling bored or like, oh God, when's it going to be over? But I remember just feeling like this is noise.
I definitely felt some padding in the film. Like there's a subplot with rednecks that's like, there is kind of a point to it dramatically, but the way it goes, it doesn't end up feeling like it adds enough to be necessary.
Right. Now, before we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, going back to where we were, I did want to bring up, so after the whole Lady Kong introduction, they get a bit of a back and forth between the university wanting Lady Kong and our main character? Is he our main character?
I mean, I feel like Linda Hamilton's more the protagonist in this film, but he's like
But what does she do?
She revives Kong.
That's about it.
She and other guy help Lady Kong, and they are there.
And the other guy also like makes things happen where they can, buy a reserve. He's the one that tries I feel like he does more than her, and very much throughout the film is more the main character.
Yeah, but I think overall Linda Hamilton has more screen time in this.
Maybe.
It felt like she had more of a screen presence, at least, then.
Maybe it's because she's a better actress?
I thought the other guy's fine. I thought he was fine.
I don't know. I was a little bored with the characters in this movie.
Oh, I don't think they're like very good characters. I just felt I thought the actors were fine.
Yeah.
It felt like they were doing a job. They weren't really putting a lot into their performances, but they were doing it.
I will say our main character, Hank, so he's kind of, following his introduction here, he's kind of portrayed as a greedy...
See, that felt weird. It almost felt like they were setting him up to be like a complete sleazeball, but then he ends up being the love interest.
Right, and he ends up like doing more to help Kong than anything else. which is kind of opposite of the first film, because in 76, like the whole greediness was like the bad guys thing.
Right.
And I think another issue that this film has is, while there's supposed to be a very obvious villain character, he's not really, his presence is not a villain.
Right, yeah.
Which we'll talk about when we actually get to him.
Yeah.
But they end up making a deal, and they bring Lady Kong to this facility to do the blood transfusion to help Kong, because we learn that it's not his heart that's bad.
It's blood more from being comatose for several years.
Which they still put the heart in, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. It's like, if he doesn't need a heart transplant.
Well, I think it was that the heart transplant, he did need that, but like it wouldn't do too much without also having a blood transfusion, I thought was the idea.
That would make sense. Now, I will say I do like the idea of doing medical procedures on Kong. I mean, they would later do that for Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. Again, more MonsterVerse influence.
I mean, we just brought up the Colonel.
We're going to talk about the Colonel when we get there. But I do think it's funny how both of these De Laurentiis films seem like they helped create the Kong we see in the MonsterVerse.
I like how you hesitated to call him King Kong.
I did. Notice how I stuttered and went to just say Kong.
Yeah, that's why I pointed it out.
Mm-hmm. That was intentional.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's your takeaway on the whole thing with, because we both highlighted it last time, and it sounds like we're both going to talk about one aspect of this film specifically, but how both of these films kind of do feel like more of the building blocks for Kong in the MonsterVerse than the original or the 2005 one.
I think it's very funny how I thought it genuinely surprised me how much very clearly Skull Island in particular takes from these this duology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of makes sense.
A fair few of those aspects better. Particularly this Colonel character is probably the most obvious example.
I think it's a good example of how the concepts of both of these films weren't bad. There's some legitimately good concepts in these films. It's just they weren't developed enough.
Right.
And they weren't executed well enough. They would work. They could work. They did work. Just not the way that they did them.
Right. But yeah, Kong gets his transfusion.
The ADR's awful.
Of course. Everyone celebrates. Lady Kong is sad, and she ends up waking up the real Kong.
Actually, I wanted to ask your opinion on this. Did you chuckle at how much blood squirting sounds they had to put in the transplant sequence?
It didn't really stick out to me, no.
Oh, I noticed it. I wrote it down. I was like, oh my god, how much more squirting of blood and whatnot do they have to put in here? Because it was like they were using a squeegee. It sounded like there's just a squeegee being used. But yeah, no, Lady Kong, which they put in a weird,
a containment facility.
Yeah, but it's really tiny. It's just this long, thin kind of.
It is meant to be a bit inhumane.
Right. Kong wakes up. He starts calling out to Lady Kong and whatnot. Now, during the whole calling out sequence, there's a really funny line. Do you know which line I'm referring to?
The one about him being horny?
Yes. It's like, oh my god, this film, it's 76
really out of place in the film.
No,
at least
it doesn't
76, the weirdness kind of
makes sense.
It at least it permeates throughout the film,
mm-hmm.
and it fits in a weird way.
Right.
It's like I can't imagine 76 without that era of sleaziness.
Right. Whereas, and it's weird because you would imagine it's the 80s, right? An 80s creature feature, there's a good amount of sleaze in a lot of 80s lower budget.
It's kind of got that 80s sleazy feel in a couple scenes where it's kind of going for the 80s horror movie vibe near the end.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that too.
But it almost feels like it's from a different movie.
Yes. When Kong disappears in about the halfway point of this film, the movie changes drastically. Outside of the human plot of we gotta release Lady Kong, that's the only thing that feels like it's still following pretty well. Yeah. Everything else just kind of feels very different.
And it's also not helped by, like, the human drama in this film, like the romance plot in particular, like, resolves itself in very early on in the film. Like, before the halfway mark, our two main characters have fallen completely in love with each other, which is fine, but it ends up just feeling like not, like, it's not that not a lot is happening in the film. It's like just after that point, there isn't much interesting with these characters outside of let's help Kong.
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest faults of the movie is they don't even, like, Kong doesn't even really need help. Like, our main characters, they don't, and this goes back to the whole, like, who's the main character, because they don't really do much after Kong disappears. They just kind of are there. Right.
They help Lady Kong a little bit, and that's about it.
I guess towards the end they do help Lady Kong. But even then, what they do ends up being a moot point because Kong comes and saves her either way. Now, speaking of the whole King Kong thing and Queen Kong, Lady Kong, a lot of Kongs.
Not Queen Kong. There is no Queen Kong. That one.
They don't like that. Yeah. So we do when we go see whenever we get the Kong escaping from the facility going to help the Lady Kong, I thought it was humorous how the scene kind of turned into chaos despite there being a huge lack of stuff initially. Like, when Kong breaks in to help Lady Kong, they say, like, use the bulldozers to, like, fight Kong, which is a really stupid idea.
Yeah, I thought that was really kind of funny.
And then, like, suddenly military men show up, which makes sense. I mean, it's supposed to be a military operation, but the fact they weren't there from the get-go is really funny. And then our main character, like, takes out the military car by ramming it. Like, did he kill those people? They went flying.
The scene also has one of the best lines of dialogue in the movie when, after the security guard reports Kong's escape, another dude comes up to, like, the main doctor or whatever, or the colonel or someone, and he's like, "Chief, it's Maslansky. The other monkey's gone ape shit." Yes.
Yeah, no, that line I was...
And I'm like...
Face-palmed.
What am I listening to? What is the script?
Also, the names in this movie are ridiculous.
Yeah.
Hank Mitchell, Amy Franklin, Archie Newitt, Benson Hughes, Andrew Ingersoll, Major Pete.
Everyone sounds like an NPC character name.
It's like, what are these names? Why is the colonel named Archie?
Oh, God.
Oh, God. What a movie. What a movie. So the two escape, and we didn't establish our introductions to the film before we started, but my first scene I saw of this movie was the scene of Kong carrying Lady Kong following this sequence in the doc Godzilla and Other Movie Monsters. Eventually I did see it on I think it was DVD.
I've never watched this film before, but I have seen about 5 or 10 minutes of, like, near the end of the film. I'd seen that when I was a kid.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And that's about it. Like I just remember seeing like about like 5 or 10 minutes of like Kong, Lady Kong, and the baby Kong.
Right. Yeah, I remember this scene of before I had seen the film. I remember the scene of Kong carrying Lady Kong, and then one of the close-ups of Kong like running during the final fight. That was about it.
So this is mostly like a completely fresh movie to me.
See, it's been so long since I've seen it.
Because like I didn't even know the plot outside of King Kong's alive. There's a baby and I think a Lady Kong.
See, I remember, I knew that Kong was brought back with a heart transplant. I knew there was a Lady Kong. I knew that Kong and Lady Kong hooked up and there was a baby Kong, and that Linda Hamilton had a love interest in the movie and they sleep together once. That was all I remembered. Mm-hmm. Oh, and that there was that some people got ate at the end and that there were rednecks. That's all I remembered from my first viewing. And I understand why now, which I'll talk about during the end.
Actually, yeah, I was talking with some people about the movie like earlier today before I watched it, and someone mentioned that they didn't really like the 76 film, but when it came to this film, they just could not remember anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Should we jump back into the film then, following their escape?
Yeah, Kong carries his lady off into the sunset, and the
movie's not over.
Unfortunately, we're only about a third through, if even.
Yeah, isn't this about 30 minutes into the 84-minute movie?
Oh, it's more than 84 minutes.
No, it's 104.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. So yeah, from this point on, pretty much we're in the second act, but pretty much it's mostly just everyone's looking for Kong and Lady Kong.
While they're off on the nature sanctuary.
What, Linda
living
Hamilton
it up?
And the other dude? What's his name? Mitchell?
Yeah.
Yeah. They find
what about him?
They end up finding the Kong and Lady Kong having their little romance. Both having their romances, right. I should say.
I did want to bring up that when we see Kong and Lady Kong living it up,
I was not expecting to see Kong slap her ass.
There's a scene where Kong like gifts her a snake, which I took as like a little nod to the 76 film, and how she like runs off from it, so he just kind of plops it back down on the ground. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, I thought it was funny when she stole his tree.
Yeah.
Like, I think that bit's generally a pretty fun scene.
I do think that the idea of Lady Kong and seeing kind of Kong and Lady Kong interact is kind of nice.
It's a fun new side to the character, yeah.
I think it's a little underdeveloped. There's a lot more they could have done with it.
Yeah, but at the same time, it does kind of also, at least the way the film portrays it, it almost feels Kong himself in this film kind of just feels cheap. Kind of going back to that lack of grandiosity, he doesn't really feel like the King Kong, the legendary monster.
Right, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that in the film, most of the time he's running away.
Yeah.
Or he's standing around roaring.
Yeah.
Or bawling his eyes out.
And that's also just like the general, like, I don't know, film just doesn't like have any like atmosphere to it. There isn't like, obviously there's no build up to Lady Kong. There's not a lot of build up to like the transfusion and revival of Kong either. There's a little bit, but not. If it doesn't feel as big of a moment as it should.
Right. When Kong later on at the end of this section of the movie, when he jumps off the cliff, it doesn't really feel. It just kind of feels like it's happening.
Yeah.
The air quotes the death of Kong in this scene. That scene specifically doesn't really feel that heavy. The whole separation of the two Kongs just is there.
Right.
And even the ending is just kind of, it's very abrupt and it ends so quickly. And it's, again, it's just a lot of noise that even the build up to that conclusion, that tragedy of King Kong, it doesn't really feel like a build up.
Right.
And the birth of the baby Kong just happens.
Yeah.
There's no build up there either. There's no like, we're just told she's going into labor. Kong fights the military. Kong's dying. Kong sees babies born. It's a very anticlimactic movie.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help that the final fight sequence just feels like the one that happened when he was rescuing Lady Kong, but with guns.
I mean, Kong's rampages in this film tend to just not be terribly exciting in this film, I'm afraid.
There's no downtown New York awesome miniatures, great cinematography attacking the train sequence in this one.
The most engaging scenes with Kong in this film tend to be just some moments in the forest between him and Lady Kong. Actually,
real quick, speaking of that made me remember something. Didn't Rick Baker work on Little Shop of Horrors?
Maybe. I don't.
If he did, then that was 1986. That's what he was doing. The only reason I thought about that was because there's some beautiful miniature work in that reminds me of King Kong 76. Doesn't look like he worked on Little Shop of Horrors.
Damn. Oh well. But yeah, no. After our main characters, the Kongs and Linda Hamilton and Mitchell all, mingle with each other, find out their true feelings and all that.
Which was also boring. It just happens.
Yeah. The next day, the military shows up and...
You're not going to skip over the easily the funniest part of a PG movie. You're not about to do that.
The lip slip?
Yes.
Oh, boo-hoo, cry a river.
It's a PG movie. I remember as the 5... I remember as, I think it was 7.
You can watch 7 G-rated movies with nipples. You're allowed to have that as long as it's in a non-sexual context.
In America, you're not.
Well, in America, you guys are pansies.
Oh. But I do remember as like a 7-year-old, I remember like this scene happened and I was like, what did I just see? And I was mortified. I was like, I hope my mother doesn't know that I watched this movie. But then I went back to like confirm that I saw what I saw. Because I was like, there's no way that just happened.
Bro, it's
like and then I was like, oh my god.
Second. Bro, isn't your favorite movie like Terror of Mechagodzilla? I
watched the Bob Kahn Enterprise cut.
That. Oh.
Yeah. And that was also admitted from the other US release. Remember, I grew up in a time where we didn't have the Japanese versions.
Well,
I grew up before your time.
Well, it sucks to be America. What do you mean? The DVD release, the Australian DVD release doesn't cut it, so that's just an America problem.
It's the 2 US versions that were widely available.
Yeah, America problem. So shut up.
Hey, without that, we wouldn't be here. Yeah. So shut up.
No. What do you want me to shut up? Rude. But yeah, they gas the Lady Kong and end up capturing her. Kong shows up to save her, but this ends up leading into his death.
Now, during this whole scene, Lieutenant Colonel Archie's also shouting out orders, and you can tell that he's a very fresh actor because it's all very bland. Again, these people do not know what they're doing. I remember, like, when I was watching and I was listening to it, I was like, oh my god, like, I can't even believe he's giving these orders.
Mm.
They're just so bland. There's literally, it sounds like he's reading from a script, which he probably is. It's probably ADR, and he's probably reading it from the script in front of him.
Also, I think it's kind of funny that the film tries to make this scene more dramatic with all of a sudden
rain?
a storm.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's very like overbearing too.
There's like tons of wind, and it's just showering everybody.
Like at the end of the sequence, like Linda, like there's a shot of Linda Hamilton, Mitchell, and the Colonel, like in like the forest or whatever, and it's like the screen is just gray because it's covered like 80% by rain.
Right, but also the lighting is still the exact same lighting from the entire sequence.
Right.
So, like, it doesn't even look like clouds have went over. It just looks like it's pouring rain for some reason.
Right, yeah.
Now,
I will say there is a very nice match shot when Kong's like over the ravine, looking at the other side, like the opposite side of the ravine. I think there's a very cool match shot there.
Right. I do think it's funny, too, speaking of this whole ravine, when Kong jumps, like, it takes him a while to get to the bottom. And it's really funny because you can tell that jumping sequence is supposed to be really intense and, like...
It's meant to be intense, but it doesn't feel that way. It just...
No.
I don't know. This entire movie feels like it's kind of a whimper.
It does. It feels like a lot of nothing's going on the whole time.
Yeah.
And as soon as Kong... when Kong, like, is floating in the river and hits the rock, it looks so, like, bad. They also give us, like, the stinger of, like, Kong's heart's giving out. Yet that issue, like, seemingly is not a problem for the rest of the film.
Right. Yeah. They kind of have this thing where they're trying to pay attention to Kong's heart and its activity, and near the end they're like, well, the machine attached to Kong's heart is broken. He's not going to last another day. But then it's like he continues going on until he's shot and completely battered and bloodied by the military, to the point where it's like, you don't really need this machine. Just have the military be the ones kill Kong. Like, just have him die from his injuries. It's kind of what it feels like, regardless.
Right. Yeah, no, this like, Kong, following this, like, seemingly goes to a swamp. He lives there. He strolls around. He gets rocks falling onto him. He gets out of the rocks and he rescues Lady Kong, and then fights the military. And his heart, the pacemaker or whatever, the artificial heart, just, it's fine. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it gets...
It would be fine if they just didn't make the heart like a kind of a constant point for Linda Hamilton's character, because it ends up not really mattering in the grand scheme. Like, it doesn't
because she
enough.
She even has a plot MacGuffin device with that remote remote fixer or whatever that can like fix the thing remotely as long as she's like nearby. And it no longer is brought up after this, if I remember correctly.
It is brought up, but it gets destroyed by Kong at one point near the end.
Oh.
And then after that, that's when she's like, Kong, without that, Kong can't survive another day. But then he goes to fight the military and gets shot a bunch of times. So it's like, yeah, you don't need that.
Like, whatever.
You don't need that.
Now, going back to the plot of this film, this is where the movie like full on stops until the rednecks. Right.
There's a bit of like a time skip for like a few months where Mitchell goes and goes looking for a reserve for Lady Kong, but the military, the colonel is being an a-hole, so they're not really letting they're not really giving the scientists proper access to the Lady Kong, even though they got permission from the Secretary of Defense, so Secretary General.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, you went above him. Why? Like, it doesn't make sense. Why would it suddenly be off limits?
I mean, it's also just like, what's up with this colonel? Why is he like this?
Right, yeah, they
There's
don't
no
even
real
give him
motivation for him.
Right, and that's like, he's literally there just doing what he's told. That's basically what he's doing.
Not even that. He's actively like disobeying orders to kill Kong. Like near the end.
That's right.
Like it specifically mentioned that the general orders for Kong's capture, I want to say, or at least not his death.
Yeah.
But the colonel's informed of it through like a guy telling him from the radio transmission, and the colonel's like, we're having radio malfunctions. Basically, I didn't hear any of what you just said, and we're gonna pretend none of that was ever told to us.
It's so stupid.
And I mean, it's a fine idea. I mean, a certain other Kong movie showed how this sort of character could definitely work, and work really well as an antagonist. But here it just doesn't.
Yeah.
That lack of motivation in particular, I think, is really what kind of kills it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and especially towards the end, it just kind of feels like he's a person that's just there. You know, once he, after the initial fight where he gets bloodied up, after that, it just seems like he's there to try and
he's
end
just
this.
there to be a problem for our characters.
Yes. And then he kind of gets killed in a very anticlimactic way.
Yeah.
Which it would work if you had another big bad for Kong to then fight. Or have like another problem. But it's like he kills this character, he goes over, he falls down, he sees his son, he dies. It's very plot convenient.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. But regardless, after this, when we finally cut back to Kong, we get to see him hunting some crocodiles.
We do.
I do find it kind of funny that they cut from an adult crocodile to a baby one to show for the size difference to give Kong scale. But I hope that baby croc was okay. It looks like he wasn't harmed, but you know, with 70s, 80s films, you don't always know.
Especially low-budget ones by Dino De Laurentiis.
Oh no, that's true. Oh no.
Rest in peace, baby crocodile.
I was gonna check. I was actually gonna check the film if it had like in the end of the credits, no animals were harmed in the making of this. I didn't check, but you know, I do have this up now. So, yeah, I don't see one of those. That's concerning. Yeah, I don't see no animals were harmed in the making of this. Oh no. Oh no.
So the answer is yes, animals were harmed in the making of this.
Possibly. Quite
more
possibly.
than likely.
I don't know. They cut before the crocodile, the baby croc looks like it actually would be harmed. So maybe they didn't.
Actually, it probably is not included because they didn't go through unions. Like, even talking about another little detail, I noticed that in the film, like the credits, both the opening and the closing credits, feel very amateur. Like it does not feel like a production. And I guarantee you that's probably because of the non-union aspect of the film.
I mean, the thing is, with like 70s and 80s films, it's like, there's like, nowadays, I feel like there's a pretty uniform style to Hollywood credits, especially for like blockbusters, but generally with like 80s films, I wouldn't say there's like one single like universal style.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's fair.
I don't know. It didn't really stand out to me that way.
It just felt very amateurish to me.
I disagree. I thought it looked fairly professional, honestly.
So if I remember correctly, basically the next 20 minutes of this film is just Kong being in the swamps, Lady Kong being chained up, and our two main characters trying their best to like get Lady Kong
Yeah.
out.
By this point of the film, it's really starting to drag on. There's a bit of padding with a small subplot with some rednecks capturing Kong.
Before that, before we get to that, Kong does kind of walk up on this little area that suddenly, like, there's a ton of people in the 3 buildings he's next to. Like, a whole panic ensues. And then the next day, there's, like, a group, like, tons of people out to kill him, which is where we get introduced to our rednecks.
Which is kind of funny, because at the beginning of the film, people were celebrating Kong's revival.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of strange, given what happened 10 years prior.
Right. And another thing, too, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, King Kong 76, kind of one of the ideas behind the film is the commodity of King Kong.
Mm.
And it feels like this film very much does not carry over the concept of the commodity of King Kong and really just animalizes him, but also tries to make him feel like a character, like a human character. I mean, he literally gets top billing in the cast.
Yeah, him and Lady Kong both get top billing, yeah.
Whereas they, for the most, like, anytime they're around the humans, they're made to be animals. But when they're by themselves, they're meant to be more, they're given a more human character approach.
I mean, I think that generally works here.
But it doesn't work in the context of the last one. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. There's kind of just this tonal issue with the film where it feels so far removed from the last film, even though it's a direct sequel.
I think part of that's the problem with the 10-year time jump and the huge lack of carryover with people. And another thing, too, I'm going to throw this out there. Dino De Laurentiis wasn't even the producer on this film.
Yeah, it was his wife.
Mm-hmm. So even though he technically worked on it, in a technical standpoint, he was not there.
He didn't even want to attach his name to it outside of his company.
Mm-hmm. So at that rate, the only thing that carries over is the fact that his company produced it, and John Guillermin mostly directed it.
And Carlo Lombardi did effects. Those are about like those are the 2 people carried over as far as I'm aware.
So it's really funny. I guess it's not funny. It's, when you think about it that way, it makes sense why they're so different. But like you said, it's a direct sequel. It should not feel this different.
Right. Well, it doesn't even feel like it's from the same director.
Correct. Right. And that's the thing. Like, even though Guillermin's given the credit, we know he didn't do all of it.
Right. Right.
And I think part of it too, I know we talked about the cinematographer.
Blockbuster director, not like even outside of King Kong, he'd done several big blockbuster productions. He was a fairly big name at the time. But this does not feel like a film that was directed by someone who had done blockbusters like King Kong 76. This feels like just someone, just kind of a director for hire, which, I mean, I guess in some regards, you know, it sounds like Guillermin wasn't very passionate about this project. Sounds like it was more for a paycheck, and, you know, I imagine he was probably very well could have still been grieving his son from the sounds of it as well.
It sounds, well, I guess this is a good time to bring up, this is his last movie.
Well, he did do a TV movie after this.
But this is his last theatrical film. This was the last time he directed. And he was alive for another, 20, 30 years. But King Kong Lives was his last hurrah on a theatrical film.
Yeah.
And I think a lot, between the letdown of the project that fell through with Sean Connery, his letdown of his previous film, how angry and how, dislocated he was from this production, the death of his son. It really honestly just kind of feels like there's a very obvious reason why this is his last picture. His heart was no longer in this. And let's be honest here, he had been he was born, I think, in the 20s. So he was pretty, he was in his 60s or 70s at this point. He probably didn't even have the energy to really do a big budget production film. 10 years can do a lot to somebody. And I also attribute some of the lack of scale and the look of it and whatnot to the lack of the director of photography. I know, if I remember correctly, the director of photography...
I was wondering about that, because it is a different director of photography. But the thing is, I don't know, it's still got a good director of photography. I mean, this film has the guy who did Return of the Jedi.
Oh.
Yeah.
But how much of that is the effects department, and how much of that was...
well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that aspect.
But see, I think that's the kicker is that.
Right. Yeah, because generally, the actual main unit stuff looks at worst okay.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, I think it looks pretty alright. It actually uses the foreground.
Right, and specifically with that director of photography for King Kong 76, I think about especially the on-location stuff where they really utilized
the on-location and the general atmosphere in the lighting and especially the use of fog in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we get this little side adventure with Kong getting tortured by some rednecks and then killing them.
Which this whole sequence is just kind of one of them ends up being stop it, guys. Don't do it. And he just kind of stands there and still lets them do it. He doesn't really do a lot to Well,
he tries to stop them and then they just kick him to the ground and take his gun.
Which...
But Kong just kills all of them anyways, pretty much.
Right, it's his quote-unquote redemption doesn't really feel relevant. They could have not included that and it wouldn't have done a lot. That's one of those few moments where it's just cut it.
It's kind of meant to be this turning point in the story of, whoa, Kong's officially killed people, the military now. They're gonna have a reason to kill him. But it's this was never stopping them to begin with, and Kong had already killed in the previous film. It's this turning point kind of falls flat.
Mm-hmm. And it's to me, it was it's literally four rednecks. In what world are they going to look at this and they're going to be oh, he's a danger to all of us?
Yeah, I mean, Kong just killing people in general. It's I feel that's fine. It just falls flat in the context of the film.
Oh yeah, this whole scene falls flat. To be honest,
I mean the kills are all right. They're cool.
The kills. The only thing that I said positive about this scene was Kong ripping people in half and eating people is a welcomed 80s gore inclusion.
Yeah. I like the little bit where he pulls the hat out of its tooth.
Yeah.
That's a nice
It is what it
gag.
is for me. See, to me, it was okay, I've kind of already seen that before, with Worth Gargantua's, where Gyra spits out the clothing. It's just kind of whatever.
I don't remember that moment. Following this, Kong just goes around town The military continues chasing after him. Honestly, not a lot really.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't
for,
even...
the next 10, 15 minutes, honestly.
Right, because the redneck sequence, that happens, isn't that about at the hour mark?
It's like hour 10 mark or something.
And then, like, yeah, the next 10, 15 minutes, because the final...
It's honestly like, there's
Kong...
just like a 20-minute stretch of this film where it's just like, padding that's barely relevant and doesn't really add much in terms of matter.
Right, because this... Don't they go to, like, try to look and check on Lady Kong, and they get denied, and then they go back, they try it again, and then...
They almost
that's when they learn
something.
Yeah, but then they break in again and they find out that she's pregnant.
Well, they break in. They finally break in once stuff actually starts happening with the military, like fighting Kong at the base, because they take the opportunity of Kong's attack to sneak in.
No,
yeah, because Kong's attacking the base and it's all in chaos, and then so while everyone's distracted dealing with Kong, they sneak in.
I thought they said that there was a break-in.
Yeah, Linda Hamilton and Mitchell are the break-in.
Yes. And then Linda Hamilton, like, for a brief second, woos the people that are, like, monitoring Lady Kong, and then...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're doing that while Kong's attacking the military.
Are you sure? Because Kong just strolls up, breaks in, and pulls Lady Kong out, and they leave.
He had a whole fight with the military whilst Linda Hamilton and Mitchell were going in the base. Don't you remember the whole action sequence that kind of sucked?
That's probably why I don't remember it.
Fair enough. The military action with Kong always kind of sucks in this film.
Yeah, because
it's
and
mostly
this is
a lot
something
of just jeeps exploding.
Right, and that happens in the early scene when Kong breaks Lady Kong out of her first cage, and then in the ending is like things get flipped, explosions happen,
but it's never actually
a bunch
very
of
exciting.
Noise. No, it's not. And yeah, so Kong eventually breaks in. The whole breaking Lady Kong out from our main characters is kind of a moot point. Lady Kong takes Mitchell and then sets him down. And then they run off in the really awful wide shot that I talked about at the beginning of this.
Yeah. I do kind of think the inversion of the Kong and the lady with Lady Kong and Mitchell is kind of a fun idea. That's neat.
That was kind of whatever.
It's a neat inversion of the idea. I don't think there's any other Kong movie that's really done that, so good on them for doing something different.
Also, I did want to bring up the with the wide shot. This was where I really realized, now granted I think the entire film does a really bad job, like the scale in this movie is pretty bad.
Yeah, the scale always kind of feels off in this film.
Now, I did notice that I like how Kong is walking on all fours in this one. He didn't in 76, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was more... They've added, like... They've given him slightly more gorilla features in this one. Like, they've added, like, arm extensions to the design here. And obviously, they gave him the gorilla walk.
Which was supposed to happen in 76, but then they opted out of that, if I remember correctly.
Right, yeah, I vaguely remember that.
But they escape, and then, like, Kong, like, finds a spot for Lady Kong to start giving birth. Which this all happens really conveniently, too, by the way.
She goes into labor, and the military has their last stand against Kong.
Which, again, they riddle Kong with bullets, except this time it's... I don't know, to me it felt like they were using... Yeah, like, suddenly he becomes the bloodbath that he was in 76.
Yeah.
During all of this, knew it, this is where the Packard influence really shines through.
Yeah, I think he dies in this scene or the one before. I don't remember which rampage.
No, he dies.
Honestly,
he dies in the second one because he dies right before Kong dies. He dies in the graveyard where Kong smashes him with his fist, just like Packard does in Skull Island.
Right.
And this is really where, like, I got the Packard influence. It was like, oh, so this is, yeah. Like,
see, I realized it when I realized they were both colonels and that they hate Kong.
oh.
I'm like, oh, I see.
They both
Skull
die
Island.
the same way.
Yeah, that too. But yes, after his death, Kong goes back to the barn to witness as he meets his child.
Who's the size of a human.
Yeah.
And it's like, what?
Mm.
Like, Kong is 100 feet tall. I don't think he would give his female companion would give birth to a 6 foot tall baby. Like, let's think about it. Like, a baby's what? A foot long when it's born? Like a normal human baby is about a foot long. Humans grow to be about 6 feet. Like, a sixth of 100 feet would be what? Wouldn't that be like 20 feet?
I feel like that's the most mild complaint. I feel like different animal babies are different size depending on the animal, you know?
Okay, but if they're trying to, like, do the whole Kong human primate, like, Homo sapien, like, biology thing, this is a really tiny baby.
Sure.
What's son of Kong's
Kiko?
What's son of Kong's name?
Kiko.
Kiko was like 20 feet tall.
Yeah, but
maybe 10.
But Kiko wasn't a baby either.
He was pretty close.
He was young. He wasn't a baby. He wasn't a newborn.
I mean, Kiko was what? Maybe a year or two old?
Looked a little like he wasn't King Kong size, but he wasn't too much smaller.
King Kong was only 35 feet in that one or something. Depending on the scene. This Kong is like 3 times the size of that one.
I mean, I feel like this is I feel like regardless, this is the most mild complaint of the movie.
Either way, it's still stupid.
I honestly think I don't think it matters.
I think it matters. The effects in this movie suck.
Dumb complaint. The effects are just, they're whatever in this movie. They're whatever.
This is easily the worst looking King Kong movie we've covered.
Apparently, I think the baby Kong scenes are actually reshoots. Because from what I understand, the mask they had originally, it was supposed to have like a bigger head.
Kong does have a very big head in this movie.
I was referring to the baby. That kind of makes sense. Like the baby was meant to have like, more like how like a toddler, like proportionally, has like a bigger head.
Mm-hmm. Right, because your head doesn't really grow that much.
Right. But yeah. So the title was a lie. King Kong's dead.
Yeah, and then the final scene, so after the death of Kong, like we cut to Lady Kong and Baby Kong on an island.
On the reserve that Mitchell had arranged for earlier, or had started arranging for. Which,
in this scene, there's like some close-ups of Lady Kong, and like the scale is ruined.
Yeah.
Like she looks just like the size of a normal gorilla. Everything in this final scene with them together is awful. Honestly, you could have just cut the ending. Just end the movie. Just get it over with.
You just hate this movie. It sounds like you're not a real King Kong fan.
I never said I hated it. I just want it over.
Okay.
And then we get an establishing shot in the credits roll, and our suit actors get top billing, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah, that was a nice
and ironic.
Surprise. Yeah, you'd think someone like Linda Hamilton or Brian would get top billing.
Well, I was more referring to the fact that, like, in the original 76 one, there was, like, 0 credit to the special effects team.
That's right. Until they, made sure it happened.
Right, yeah, when Rick Baker was like, you're going to put at the very end of this movie how much you appreciate your effects.
At the very beginning of the credits, actually.
Oh, that's, yeah.
It was the first thing in the credits.
And he was like, fine. Yeah, it almost kind of feels like it's a slap to the face for Rick Baker. Because he went uncredited I don't think he even got mentioned. Did he get mentioned in the producers would like to thank the special effects team? I don't think he singled out Rick Baker, did he?
I don't remember.
I don't think he did. Maybe he did.
I feel like he did.
But either way,
I'm pretty sure I remember seeing his name in the credits, but I don't remember well enough. Regardless, I don't remember. As far as I can tell, this one at least didn't have any sort of that issue behind the scenes, any of that sort of little controversy.
It was just everything else it had problems with.
Oh, yeah. That's true. So that was King Kong Lives.
Yeah, so I mean, where do we go from here? Do we want to do our thoughts? Do we want to hear the cast and crew? Do we want to talk about the legacy? Let's do legacy. Let's do the legacy and like after the film came out and whatnot.
Okay. Well, first off, it bombed in the US hard, and they had absolutely no faith in its performance in the US, so much so that they tried paying off critics. Siskel and Ebert in particular mentioned on their show how they were contacted and they were told for their review, if they want to use footage from the film in their review, they can only use it on their local Chicago show, but not their national show, unless they signed an agreement to write a positive review on the film.
That's funny.
Or give a positive review on the film. And then Ebert went on to tell a story about how at the screening of the film he attended, all the kids in the theater became friends and were playing with the door handle instead of watching the film.
Yeah, the film was like listed as like, didn't it like get nominated for a Razzie too for like worst film or something? Yeah,
but apparently it did very well in Russia and Japan. Japan apparently loved it.
Yeah, I remember somebody.
It even got 2 tie-in games.
I remember hearing. I think it was Henry Winston. I think he said this, that if King Kong Lives had been made in Japan, everybody would say it's great. But because it was an American film, it was deemed as bad. Which, what do you think on that?
I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily like just because of where it comes from that it's necessarily bad. It's just there's a lot of like, when it comes to the effects, for example, it just, the cinematography, I feel like, is a big thing that's holding it back. Again, the very flat look to the special effects scenes. I think that really hurts the film for me a lot. Like nothing about there's very few special effects shots in the film that I think look all that good or cool or interesting. I mean, the thing is, from what I understand, they also struggled with the effects shots because they weren't able to see the dailies for the film. Mm-hmm. So usually like you'd have the dailies being printed like in-house, but they couldn't do that for this film because of where like the production office. So they would have it being printed in New York, and then a like higher up production member would see the dailies, and they would just say if it was good or tell the crew if it was good or bad. So that probably hurt things as well, on top of like a seemingly pretty inexperienced crew. From what I understand, like when it comes to like lighting the miniatures, for example, a lot of the people behind that didn't really know a whole lot about lighting miniatures, because lighting miniatures is a whole kind of a separate thing to lighting like a regular size set.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe like if it was a Japanese like team, then I guess I'm sure like the effects would probably be a little better, because I'd hopefully imagine it would be like the studio that would take the film would be one that with a
like Toho.
Yeah, like Toho, I imagine who would either have or know the people to contact who make something, whom are a bit more experienced in special effects, like that is their specialty.
Right. Well, as we know, Toho, one of the only parts of their effects department that's left is the special effects lighting, the miniature lighting. Like, yeah, that's the most important thing about the effects, according to Toho. So they'd at least get that right.
I don't know. Either way, I think the script itself is still just pretty lackluster regardless. So I don't think it's really... Without a rewrite, I don't know if necessarily it being a Japanese or American production would really fix the writing issues. It would just maybe fix some of the effects issues, I guess. It's really all I can
say. Right. So that actually, the whole writing issue kind of leads to kind of my kind of opinion and whatnot on the legacy of this film. You know, this honestly, like I've already said, it feels more like an Italian knockoff kind of production, not necessarily a King Kong movie. We've talked about the scale of it and whatnot. But more so, this film really and honestly does feel like it's just been kind of forgotten in the King Kong legacy. You know, I think both De Laurentiis films suffer from kind of maybe not erasure, but people tend to forget they exist.
Right. Well, they just, outside of the influence on like Kong Skull Island, what real relevance do these films have over the 33 film or the 05 remake, you know?
Okay, in all fairness, people don't even mention the connections or the similarities between the two.
Well, exactly. So it's like, if that's the only thing this really has, like, legacy, what else is there?
Right, because the Men in Suit thing was done in the Toho duology. The idea of a baby Kong was done in Son of Kong and Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. The idea of other Kongs, admittedly, the whole female Kong thing was original to King Kong Lives, but that being said, it almost that's more of a parody concept in most regards. I would argue Queen Kong has a better legacy in terms of that idea than King Kong Lives. And more so than that, I think you brought up a great point. Like, there's just not... neither of these films did anything really groundbreaking. I mean, the unfortunate end result is King Kong 76 was made mostly to try and compete against Jaws. It was kind of one of the Jaws-exploitation films in some regards. And so with that, you know, King Kong 76 in many ways just kind of feels kind of soulless, which is a complaint they've mentioned about King Kong 05 as well. And then on top of that, neither of the films really do much in terms of moving the needle for King Kong. So in many regards, this, like you said, it kind of whimpers. King Kong Lives feels like a whimper for the King Kong franchise.
Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And it really reflects in, like, the box office. You know, it made $48.9 million USD in its box office run, which, if you adjust that for inflation, that's $135.2 million. So it made about 60% its budget, more than its budget, which is good.
Right,
like,
but it absolutely bombed to hell in America.
Right, it didn't do well in America, and
made like less than 5 million, was it?
Yes, I think it was like 4.8 million.
Yeah.
And another thing to consider is the fact that until like modern day Hollywood, it wasn't the budget or the box office that deemed if your film was successful or not. It was, how did the critics take it? How did the audience take it? if your film was critically panned, you're not going to get a sequel. Look at Godzilla 98. That film, by all accounts, was successful. Yeah. By all accounts, the film was successful on an analytical, numerical standpoint. But on a critical standpoint, from the audience and the critics, it didn't do well. And that was enough to kill anything else. Though, funny enough, they were going to do a sequel to this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I read there was also, like, talks and ideas around, like, having Filmation do an animated, like, sequel with, like, the baby Kong.
Yeah, The Adventures of Kid Kong, which would have included Kid Kong having the powers to grow to the size of a mountain, like flying through outer space, being able to go to space, like laser beam eyes, invisibility, like being able to blow buildings down with his breath.
Bro, what was it?
Apparently, that was all De Laurentiis, but apparently, like, then it was like, well, that's a little too crazy. What if he has the power to...
Wasn't De Laurentiis the one who had issue with, like, the concept of a Lady Kong? In the first place? Like, you thought that was ridiculous. What?
Yeah, so the middle ground that him and the guy he hired to kind of develop it was more of a, okay, let's have Kid Kong grow to the size of his father, but shrink to the size of an insect. And I think that was all the power he really had. But they were gonna bring back the gas company, the oil company. That was gonna be the villain. They were gonna have robots. There's gonna be some people that like helped Kong. Lady Kong was apparently just gonna not really be there. But Filmation didn't like the proposal that De Laurentiis had, which was, you're going to be work for hire, and Filmation wanted co-production, co-ownership. And so, like, the meeting failed miserably, so it didn't happen. Apparently, Ronald Shusett, like, developed a live-action sequel that would have been more like Mighty Joe Young, but with Baby Kong. But that went nowhere, especially after the film bombed.
But yeah, is there anything else before we get into final thoughts?
I mean, that's I've said my piece pretty much on the film. Outside of final thoughts, of course. Do you want me to start with final thoughts and then we'll do cast and crew and wrap it up?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, King Kong Lives really just kind of feels like one of those films made in response to the 76 movie. Not like a sequel, but more as like a cash-in. It's just filled with noise. Like there's not really a lot that the film does. It just kind of feels like it's there. And stuff just happens. And maybe that's why for me it's a very forgettable movie. And I mean, it wasn't like unbearably slow like Son of Kong. Like it moved at a pace that didn't make me like hate my life watching it, but it definitely just doesn't do a whole lot. It reminds me of Godzilla Kong: The New Empire in that regard.
No, I kind of felt similarly on this film. For the first, like I said before, I felt the first half of this film was generally like fine enough. It wasn't anything really to write home about, but it was like a perfectly watchable film. But after the Lady Kong gets recaptured and we get the whole Kong dropping into the ravine and his fake death, the film just kind of completely loses steam for me, and yeah, just kind of becomes a complete chore to watch to finish off. And it just, yeah, I don't know. There's just this cheapness to the film. Not necessarily cheap as in it looks cheap, although it definitely...
It looks low budget.
It looks...
Even the locations.
Yeah, it doesn't look as high production value as the first... or as the previous film. But my issue in the cheapness is just it just has, we've kind of made that point, the grandiosity of Kong, the aura surrounding King Kong as a character just is not here in this film. Even though that's something that I think is really important to King Kong as a character. And yeah, it just was kind of it was just an underwhelming film. Not offensively bad.
Yes.
Like a lot from what I've heard of the general consensus, I think the general consensus is that this is like the worst King Kong film, or at least like live action.
Yeah.
I know there's like the Mighty Kong, which I think is hated.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know. I didn't hate this. I just didn't really like it very much either.
Right. I do think it's weird that this is like hailed as an atrocity against like cinema.
I don't think it's that bad. It's not Silverfoot. Jesus Christ.
Right, and that's the thing too, is like honestly, there's so much worse out there, like in terms of remakes, prequels, sequels, films made as a love letter to another film, original films. I don't really think that this is the crime against humanity that a lot of people really try to throw it out as.
Right. Like I'd argue this might even be better than some of the worst Godzilla films, you know?
I would say so.
So, you know, I hate to admit it, but I'll give King Kong this. I guess he never reached the lows of Godzilla in some regard.
Right. And that honestly, I think that's a great point that I didn't even think about, is because after this we have one more King Kong movie, King Kong 05. Unless I have somehow horribly forgotten that movie, there's no way that King Kong 05 is bad. There's no way it's worse than King Kong Lives. King Kong Lives is not the worst giant monster movie. King Kong Lives is not the worst
we just watched
King Kong movie.
Giant monster movie.
So it's weird to consider that like some people hail this as one of the worst when it really isn't.
Right.
It's lower. Absolutely. It's like past the middle point, but I'd say it's lower.
I mean, it's like, I guess it's one of the worst movies in the franchise. Like it's one of the ones I would call a bad movie, but like it's just not some atrocity, you know? It's not offensive.
I honestly I think it's on par with most of the King Kong knockoff movies.
I haven't seen
Yeti.
I don't think I've actually seen really many of them.
It's been a long time since I've seen any, but I would put, like, based off of what I remember, I would probably end up putting this on the same level as Mighty Peking Man, Yeti, Giant of the 20th Century, and Konga. I haven't really seen the others to really take note. I've heard a lot of bad things about the Mighty Kong, which is one of those public domain Kong movies.
Right.
So,
it's like in the whole Kong like franchise of including like the Kong, not necessarily King Kong movies, and maybe it has the lows of Godzilla. I don't know. I haven't seen like Mighty Kong and stuff like that. But just going based off these King Kong films and like the MonsterVerse films, yeah, honestly, King Kong, I'd argue he doesn't have the heights of Godzilla, but he also doesn't have his Godzilla's lows.
Right.
And yeah,
and
that's kind of where I sit on this film and I guess the franchise as a whole for King Kong.
Right. And honestly, for me, like, for the most part, I would say that Kong in general, we still have one more film, I could be proven wrong, but King Kong in general is just a more mediocre franchise. For me, I mean, this is not going to surprise anybody. King Kong 33, like, it's one of the greatest films cinema ever produced, especially Hollywood cinema. That's
good.
like the highest point for me.
I mean, it's good,
So-
but it's no King Kong vs. Godzilla.
Yeah. I guess this is a good point to transition into our rankings. No, we still have cast and crew. We still got cast and crew.
Well, go ahead.
So let me do our cast and crew, and then we'll do those rankings. Starting off with our cast, Brian Kerwin as Hank Mitchell was in the Logan's Run TV show and It Came from Outer Space 2. Linda Hamilton as Amy Franklin was in Children of the Corn, The Terminator, Black Moon Rising, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Terminator Salvation, Bermuda Depths, Terminator Dark Fate, and Stranger Things Season 5.
Wait,
Peter
what?
Elliott
She's going to be in that?
Yeah. She's going to be in that, yeah. Peter Elliott as King Kong was in Harry and the Hendersons, Congo, The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and Jack the Giant Slayer. John Ashton as Lieutenant Colonel Archie Newitt was in An Eye for an Eye, So Evil, My Sister, and The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension.
No way.
George Yaisumi played Lady Kong. He was in Interview with the Vampire Chronicles, and Dinotopia. Benjamin
Oh, no,
Keachley
Dinotopia.
played...
I remember that.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin Keachley played Baby Kong. Frank Maradin played Dr. Benson Hughes. Peter Microgotes played Andrew Ingersoll, who was in Wolfman and Chud. Michael Frost was in The Shark Attack. He was also a voice actor, so he did Masked Rider, Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue, Blade of the Immortal, the anime show, Cashern, the animated movie, or animated series, Doomed Megalopolis, the OVA, and Giant Robo. He did the English voice cast for that. Leon Rippey, who played Will, was in Firestarter, Hyperspace, Maximum Overdrive, The Arrival, and Eight-Legged Freaks. And then for your crew, John Gillerman, director, was also the director of King Kong 76. Ronald Shusett, your co-screenplay writer, did Alien, Phobia, Dead and Buried, Total Recall, Minority Report, and Alien vs. Predator. Stephen Pressfield, as co-screenplay writer, also did Free Jack. Martha Schumacher, your producer, did Wolfen, Amityville 2, The Possession, Amityville 3D, Firestarter, Cat's Eyes, Silver Bullet, and Maximum Overdrive. And then John Scott, your composer, did Jules Verne's Rocket to the Moon, Berserk, Trog, Mark of the Devil Part 2, Inseminoid, You're the Hunter from the Future. And that's your cast and crew. So, Rex, I think we're ready to transition here into the rankings.
Yeah, I think so.
So, we have 6 movies. There's one left. Whenever we cover King Kong 05, we'll have covered all the King Kong movies. What is your number 6?
Well, when we did our last ranking, we counted Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, so it's 7.
Did we?
Yes.
Oh. You did. You included it. I did not.
Oh, cry me a river.
Well, Rex, you covered it. And I'm going to continue with my ever-growing disdain for including the Monsterverse with King Kong. So you can have 7. Whenever we get to the point where your GXK is your next one, go ahead and include it, and then I'll go off mine.
Okay, so what's your number 6, 7, whatever?
I open the floor to you first, so you go first.
So at number 7, I've got Son of Kong.
Well, number 6 for me is Son of Kong as well.
By at number 6, King Kong Lives.
I also have King Kong Lives following Son of Kong.
And at number 5, I've got King Kong, 1976.
I do too. I don't remember us agreeing this much.
Well, at number 4, I have Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. No comment.
I don't have a ranking.
Well, what's your number 3?
Well, my number 3 is King Kong Escapes.
Damn, lame. I've got King Kong 33.
Yeah, no, my number 2 ends up being King Kong versus Godzilla.
I've got King Kong Escapes there.
For your number 2?
Yes.
Or your number 3?
No. 33 at number 3.
Gotcha.
Toho duology for the win, bro.
Yeah.
King
Our
Kong
number
has
ones
gone
haven't
number
changed. And I'm King Kong 33. It's funny how we 100% agree with our bottom 3 King Kong movies. But our top 3...
We seem to 100% agree the Toho King Kong movies are the best after the original. That's funny. Or in my case, they are just straight up the best.
Right, no, literally, like, the thing that's different is I put King Kong 33 above them, you put the 33 below them.
And that's just because I'm not a big 33 guy. I don't know why, I didn't completely vibe with it.
Perhaps you're just not a fan of cinema, Rex.
No, I like movies. We had a whole discussion about how... we had a very overly long discussion about how it's almost a problem that both you and I like movies too much.
Well, speaking of liking movies too much and having a problem, Rex, I got something to tell you. And everybody listening.
What? You got diagnosed with autism?
Hello? I'm Elijah, and I have a kaiju and tokusatsu problem. Joking aside, I am Elijah Thomas. I am a writer. I've written for GodzillaMovies.com and in Kaiju Ramen Magazine. Currently, I write for Kaiju United. And my writing has also been featured in the book Giant Bug Cinema, A Monster Kid's Guide from Bear Manor Media, where I wrote about Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Outside of writing and podcasting, I also served as a consultant on the upcoming Titanic Creations officially licensed Yongari articulated figure. Go to TitanicCreations.com/Yongari to order yours today. Supplies are very limited now. I have also had the privilege to produce bonus features for SR Cinema. I've worked on Yuzo, The Biggest Battle in Tokyo, Liverleaf, and War of the Ninja Monsters, Jiron vs. Gora. You can order these Blu-rays on srscinema.com. I'm also a filmmaker and YouTuber. You can check out my stuff on my YouTube channel, ET13 Productions, where you can see some of my short films and my older YouTube videos, along with an ever-growing playlist that features all of my appearances on YouTube. I do plan on getting some new videos out eventually, so definitely check that out. You can also check out my action figure photography on my Instagram at ET13_productions, and my X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, thanks Danny, at the same handle. Rex, where can people find you at?
Well, dear listeners, you can find me on YouTube at Rexino, on Twitter at Rex_Xenomorph, and on Instagram, Rex_Xeno. And if you want to check out some of my writing, go take a look at the Tokusatsu Network.
And as for the podcast, don't forget to rate us on iTunes. That boosts our ratings and helps us get recommended to more people just like you. If you don't have an Apple device, which I don't blame you, I don't actually, that's a lie. I'm literally using a MacBook right now. You can rate us on Spotify. To stay up to date with all things Kaiju Conversation related, head over to www.kaijuconversation.com to find all of our episodes, social media, news, and updates. Follow us on Twitter at KAIJU_CONVERS. If you don't have Twitter, you can follow us on Instagram or like us on Facebook. If you're like me before podcasting and you don't have any social media, lucky you. You can email us at kaijuconversation@gmail.com, all lowercase, all one word, you know the drill. And as always, we'll read your reviews on air for everyone to hear. We also have a Teespring store. Eventually, we're going to have original artwork on there, but until then, you can sport our awesome logo on a t-shirt or maybe even a coffee mug. If you'd like to chat with us, check out our Discord server full of others that have similar interests to you. Recently, we had a discussion about Jurassic Park and those films. It's a great community full of great people. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you can be notified anytime we upload a video. We sometimes post exclusive to the channel, like bloopers for episodes or minisodes talking about news or other subjects. We also have an interview with Mechagodzilla designer Jared Kurchevsky on the channel. Definitely butchered his name, I'm so sorry about that. And a huge thanks to Rex for editing all of these episodes and all the other content we upload. His links can be found in the description below. Along with Rex, we'd like to give a huge thanks and shout out to Danny DeManna of the Godzilla Novelization Project for his amazing vocals on our theme song. You can support him by following him on Twitter at danzilla93_GNP or visit his website GodzillaNovelizationProject.com. And a huge thanks to Gratton Conwell from the podcast Giant Monster BS for composing the music for our theme song. You can support him by following the podcast on Twitter at Giant Monster BS or on any podcast platform under the name Giant Monster BS. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I don't think we have anything else really to bring up, right, Rex?
Not as far as I remember, no.
So thank you guys so much for listening. Another King Kong movie in the books, just one more, and we have wrapped on the King Kong franchise. It's pretty crazy, honestly.
Don't let King Kong make a monkey out of you.
But with that, we're going to wrap it up here now officially. So thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, please remember, life's too short to not talk big. Bye, guys.
Bye.
We are set, we are in debt, there's nothing to sweat. Life's too short now, baby. Kaiju, not too big now, baby. Conversation. His name's Elijah, baby. And also Rex now, baby. We love those kaiju, baby. And you will too now.